Maloy day, talofa, everyone. I hope you all having a great day or most likely evening from wherever you're viewing this broadcast. Speaking from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's good to be back here. I was kind of away for a little while, just overseas, visiting with some family. And yeah, we're very excited for this live digital cover session on the Polynesian Eyes podcast for everyone that's available to join us. And yeah, Dua, how's everything going on your neck of the woods? And any interesting updates lately?
No, this is officially our first live digital kava session from the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. I am a lone ranger in our new headquarters here in Las Vegas. Obviously, the family is still in San Antonio in South Central Texas, but I'm doing this long, you know, commute from San Antonio to Las Vegas for work. I usually come in on a Sunday, go back on a Wednesday. I've been doing that for 2 months now. And I'm just excited to go back this last time this coming Wednesday, pack everything up in San Antonio, and head to Las Vegas. So excited to get our first live digital kava session from Las Vegas launched, Mr.
Nice.
Aotearoa.
Nice, Dua, and it's good to get back to a normal routine since you've been doing the whole traveling back and forth for 2 months, huh? Um, nice. All right, Dor, what do you have for us? What you thinking? Shall we discuss tonight on the digital live cover session?
Yeah, so we are well overdue on a handful of our episodes, right? As all of our
Yep.
viewers know, we have our live digital kava sessions where we come online. Sometimes we answer questions from the audience. Sometimes we go through a series. One of those series is William Mariner,
Mm.
some content made by our good friend Kava University, Lolo
Oh wow. Yep.
Tuyaki, and we're about 3 months behind on doing an update there. So that's really what we're going to kind of focus on the show today. But I thought, Mussy, just kind of some conversations about kind of the progress we've done on the program, just as a part of the intro for our
Mm.
show before we get into the main meat of it is um, really the tremendous activity we've seen on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Typically it's been TikTok where we see a tremendous amount of activity, but kind of from your perspective, what have you seen from YouTube that's kind of picked up, or what are your thoughts on why there's a switch in the interactions?
I think there's a lot more engagement with our content that people are sharing on social media, and then people from social media are tuning in and watching our full broadcast on YouTube. And I feel like there's just a tremendous traffic that's coming on YouTube, and I think it's the word is just spreading about some of our content, and not only that, but the our loyal followers are sharing the digital live cover session of the Polynesian Eyes podcast. So I think that's what's contributing and the biggest factor to it for the a switch from social media into YouTube, that we're getting a lot of traffic coming in on YouTube. But that's kind of what my thoughts there, Dua.
Yeah, 100%. And it really is something that's really interesting that we kind of mentioned on some of our discussions offline, Masi, is some of the unique topics that we can, with relatively high certainty, say ideas and influences from the Polynesianized perspective is making it throughout social media. Like you're saying, a lot of our viewers are sharing the content online. We appreciate it with all
Hmm.
that support. But even other content online is sharing ideas like the Toka Tufa that we know is a very unique concept that is
Yes.
spreading. Even AI is picking it up because that one
Yes.
podcast that we were listening to on the live digital kava session, it shared certain concepts that we know originate from the Polynesian eyes. So that's kind of
Yeah,
cool. Kind of seeing this, these ideas going out, and making sure, we know not everyone's going to agree with us. We know that we're not always 100% accurate, or our ideas are the only ideas that matter. But what we want to do is make sure that everyone knows there's more than one side of the story.
correct. And just to add on to that, to like what you said, right? The biggest, like the last program you did, and I did follow it, the Tokatufa. That concept of idea has only been created or research from Devita Fale that we've kind of used. And look, AI is going through all the networks and the internet and has able to retrieve that information and share it on that AI podcast that you shared in your last program. And not only that, with the like you said, with our ideas and stuff, we're sharing it to. It's part of the throwing the idea there in the soup, and if people still wanna use that ingredient in the soup, that's where it is compared to other ideas, and that's kind of where we think we see our niche in this whole discovering and rediscovering of the Polynesian origin and history.
Yes. Another interesting thing, just before we get into the meat of the show, we'd like to thank our cousin Elon Musk.
Oh
Another
yeah.
first, Mr. Atearoa, is this is the first time the show is running through Starlink, because
Oh
because I'm moving from San Antonio to Las Vegas. I bought Starlink because I
eh,
knew I wasn't going to have internet connectivity right off the bat at the house here in Las Vegas. So right now, another first for the show I forgot to mention is we are broadcasting around the world through Starlink. So all the satellites in the
oh
sky, out there. So I thought that's a cool little trivia right there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Polynesian Princess
Hey,
Malo Malo,
wel-
welcome,
welcome,
Polly
Polynesian Prince.
Prince.
That is
So
pretty cool,
with
Tua,
Yeah,
with
it's a first. We'll
Starlink.
we'll take it. Yes. All right. With that being said, we are doing our our makeshift here with where we are located online. So we're gonna have to do some juggling here. I only have one screen rather than our multiple screens set up. So I'll be jumping back and forth here. Let me do this. I'm just gonna move it so the last two items are right next to each other. It'll help me swing back and forth. So let's jump in. You ready, Masi? Anything else before we jump into the content here from Kava University?
Nope, let's roll. Let's roll. I'm good from my side.
Let's do it.
After all that, all the carnage, everything we described, more of the personality of Finau Ukalala, Mariner, how many Palangis there were, the muskets that were there, the cannons that were there, and they've won that battle, right? And then they go back to Pangaimotu. Pangaimotu is that place that's he measured about 3/4 to a mile away north of Tonga, uh, separated by a narrow reef. So I don't know if you can walk there or not, but they go to Pangaimotu. They sit down to eat. Some of them ate in Nuku'alofa. They ate yams, plantains, and Marin, I don't know why he worded it that way, but he said that there were roasted bodies there. So it doesn't say that they ate it, any of them, but it does say that there were burning bodies. So they might have piled the bodies up and burned them, or there were, for some reason or another, there were bodies that were burning thereafter. But anyways, they were eating in Nuku'alofa. They get to Palaimoto and they start eating, and at the admonition of the priest told them, you know what, it'd be pleasing to the gods if you guys went and rebuilt Nualofa. You guys beat them, you guys conquered them. Now it's time for you guys to go back and build them. That's what the priest was telling Finau. So Finau sends a bunch of Tongans a bunch of the warriors to places in Tonga, or a place in Tonga that wasn't inhabited, to get bamboo so they can go back to Nuku'alofa and rebuild it. The night before, the chiefs in Pagaimotu told the guys in Pagaimotu to prepare pigs, yams, ripe bananas, and so forth, because the warriors are going to come eat. But at the same time, they're going to have the ceremony with the priest. So they take all this food and they take it to the priest. Now, all the matapures and the akis, they all dressed in the mats that we see typically during funeral time. They wrap themselves with big mats and they take it to the priest and go eat with them. So they go to the priest, and the priest is sitting in a hut type big house with posts. It's open, so the warriors and the matapuras and the ikis go and sit where the priest is sitting inside the house or this big hut, and then they come and make a semicircle. So it sounds like he's describing what we would do at a hala when we take stuff to for a funeral to a family, because he's the priest is sitting there inside of the hut, and then they come and they sit, and there's a guy sitting, will sit facing them. So there's a big space between the priest and the first guy that's sitting there in front of the kumete, or in front of the big bowl that they're using to palu kava in. And then the kava was chewed. It was chewed by the attendants. It was chewed by the people sitting behind this guy. They chew it and they pass it forward, and then they put it inside of the bowl that they're using to kava, and that guy starts paluing kava. And then the matapura and Akis, the ones that were dressed in mats, they come and sit around. So they're making a semicircle. It says they make an eclipse with space between the priest and them. And the kava guy sits right in the middle, the palu guy, and he starts paluing the kava. And everybody just sits. And he said that the priests or the matapuras and Akis just start sitting indiscriminately behind them, just wherever, because they thought it was pleasing. That type of modesty or that type of modest demeanor is pleasing to the gods, for them to just sit among the people, the matapuras and Akis, indiscriminately. Because you have the priest there, and there should be nobody else that's perhaps elevated above them, so they just sit among them, and it's just a guy following the kava. They feel like that type.
Let me pause it there. Any thoughts?
Nothing in particular. Do I'm just thinking of the when he said there's Pangay Motu chiefs. Were they, to my understanding, were there chiefs that lived in Pangay Motu that time? I just thought it was almost kind of vacant kind of island kind of thing. But I find it interesting that there were
Mm.
chiefs that actually lived in Pangay Motu, giving instructions to Ulukalala and his guys there regarding the, where they rest and stuff. But I just thought it was always a vacant. I just find it interesting that we're actually chief and some people living in Pangay Motu making life there. That's just me. That's what I was just kind of thinking in my head. I don't know if you have any details on that.
It, not necessarily. I think he was saying the priests, like priests,
Oh,
were on Pangay Motu, and I'm sure there were some people living there because, like you said, it's not like an island that's known for lots of people living on it. It's tiny.
mm,
Um, a couple things stand out to me as we're listening to it was, if I remember correctly, Ulukalala, after he defeats the fort in Nuku'alofa and he goes and he sees the carnage, he's kind of bothered by it,
mm,
right? Like
mm,
he's it almost seems like the fact that he was so destructive, he didn't like that, right? Because he ends up kind of saying it's almost like we get the feeling like, yes, I want to win, but if this is the destruction that it takes to win, he's like,
mm.
is it worth it? Is winning worth the destruction that this is causing? And he seems uneasy. And I find it interesting that when they go to Motu here, what do the priests say? It's pleasing to the gods that you go and you fix the fort,
Rebuild. Mm,
rebuild, right? So I find that kind of interesting because typically when you think of savage behavior, that's not something you're concerned with, right? It's like we win at all costs, we won. You know what I mean? Like the battle itself was worth the victory. But
mm,
obviously there seems to be a higher principle that is operating. And remember, William Mariner is only describing what he sees happen. And that's one of the, it's awesome to have William Mariner's perspective, but you can tell he's an outsider because he's just describing what's happening, but he can't give a lot of insight as to what's driving that type of behavior, right? And
mm,
that type of thinking. Why was Ulukalala so disturbed or uneasy when he saw the destruction? Why is it that the quote unquote gods would 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 want you to go and repair um, the conquered fort or city. I think there's some interesting questions that come up to me um, as we listen to that. But obviously, William Mariner, not knowing the religion, the culture, and the history. Any thoughts on that, Mussy? Because I think I have one more thing to bring up to see your thoughts on. But any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
No, no, good point, too. Because by now he's, when he's recording his experience and his his record of what he witnessed in Tonga, he understands the language, right? So he understands, but it
Hmm.
is interesting that it's just like same any other Tongan from Tonga. You understand the language, but if you don't really have the in-depth knowledge of cultural nuances and maybe the old way of how they do things, it can still be a little difficult to explain, even though you have the same language. You know what I mean, Tua?
Yes, yes.
Um, and that's the reason why not every Tongan from Tonga can do a proper gawa ceremony that's kind of been done. Usually, if you want to do like those gawa ceremonies for like weddings or for um, certain events and stuff, there's only like a few people that you probably have to go in contact to try to see if they're willing to assist you to do some cultural things. It's the same thing when you usually go and give a nice proper hala to a certain family. You usually want to pick out particularly a woman that understands how to present certain things, but not even though we all know the language, but the protocols or maybe the knowledge of doing certain things, not everyone has, and that's what we're seeing with Mariner just trying his best with, even though he understands the language of what's going on, but not really understanding the intrinsic uh,
Mm.
cultural practice that's going on, especially with that kava that they're doing with everyone sitting there and the with the priests and the chiefs and stuff. But that's all. That's what I'm just kind of thinking out loud, Dua.
So your comments brings up an interesting question to me, Masi, and what are your thoughts on this? It sounds like understanding the language is not necessarily the most important thing, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's helpful, it's
Yes.
useful, but understanding the language itself, um, maybe I guess the question is this: can you
Mm.
learn the culture and the principles behind the culture if you don't know the language, right? Because this is an important question. My wife has always been on my case. I didn't necessarily teach my kids to speak Tongan,
Mm.
right? And a lot of it is maybe just being lazy. I don't know. It's just something that it would it be nice to have? Yes, right? Do I
Mm.
sometimes regret it? But in my mind, now that we're having this conversation, we have William Mariner. He knows the language, but we can clearly see that just knowing the language is insufficient,
Mm.
right? And everyone seems to be, and I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer. We're just, enjoying the digital kava here and having conversation. Everyone seems to be putting a heavy emphasis. If you don't know the language, then you're not really Tongan or Samoan or Fijian. Um, but this,
Mm.
listening to
That
this,
is,
is that
yeah.
is that really the critical piece?
Ooh. Well,
We
that's see.
right?
Yeah. Well, no, you just making me create another question to your perspective. Which one is more important? Somebody who speaks the language or somebody that has the blood of the certain heritage? Like talk. That's the thing, right?
Yeah,
To me, I would always go the what's more important is the blood and heritage because to me anyone anyone can learn the language and can use that to manipulate, but you can't manipulate what runs through your blood,
that's what makes this question. That's why this question is
right?
coming up, right? Because
Mm,
so many of our Polynesian generation, I hear it all the time, and I'm not saying the language is not important, right? Like
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
it's important. Even
yes,
who
Yes.
didn't necessarily take full advantage to teach my kids the language, I sometimes like, man, maybe I should have done a little bit more. And I probably should have. But the question comes down to like what you're saying. What's more important? Knowing how to speak Tongan, but you don't have the heritage or the the understanding of what family being important, right? Not understanding respect, not understanding
Mm,
sacrifice, and 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 trying your best to maintain family relationships as much as possible. To me, kind of like tattoos and stuff. Tattoos
mm,
and stuff are great, but that's not the core of our culture. That's
mm,
not what makes us Tongan or Polynesian or Fijian or whatever. As much as the language is important, I still don't feel that that's what is at the core either.
mm,
I think, like you're saying, the 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 inheritance of the genes is a that's hugely impactful, and I'll explain. And this has been my logic behind it.
okay.
It is scientifically proven that your choices and your decisions changes your DNA. They've scientifically proven this. If for let's just use the example of alcoholism, drug
Drugs.
use.
Mm,
They've already shown that once one generation does that, the probability of the next 3 to 4 generations following in those footsteps are extremely high
mm,
because it's like it changes your genetic makeup, right? Like I read this book, Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell, and they did a study. And this is an interesting study. This just goes to show how your behavior, and it has nothing to do with language, how you behave and the choices you make changes the nature of your genetic makeup. It's almost like it records it in your blood and in your DNA. And then there's a tendency of the generations after to just follow the same genetic signal. And here's the example, Masi. They were doing studies, and so they got these people to come to, I think, Stanford to go do studies. To go, they thought the study was on the answers they were going to answer on a piece of paper.
mm,
What they didn't know is the answers on the piece of paper didn't matter. The study was set up on how they behave on their way to the study,
mm,
right? And what they did was they made the hallway to go to where they were going to take the paper test. I think it was unusually tight space. It was only like 6 feet wide or 5 feet wide, the hallway. And what they did was they had the person coming in to take the test, and they had it was a bunch of males. What they did was,
mm,
as they're going in to take the test, there is another person who is speaking very rudely to a woman who is administering the quote unquote study, right? And then what they did was the person would go in, take the test, and then as they're walking out down this hallway that's very narrow, they had the person who was acting very rudely walking in the opposite direction.
mm,
And what they did is they measured what was the distance before they decided to give space to each other, right? And they measured it. And this is the interesting thing, Masi. They could locate what type of terrain and what type of people you came from with about 80 to 90% accuracy by determine how close you came before you turned.
mm,
Does that make sense?
mm,
So the people, this is how it worked out. If your ancestors, and they could track it up to 9 generations before you, if your ancestors within 9 generations lived on the highlands in Scotland or somewhere in Ireland on the hills where land was scarce and it was very territorial, and your ancestors had to fight because losing territory meant you're probably going to die because you
Losing
didn't have the
resources.
territory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, if you came in within 6 feet before you turned to make space,
Mm.
90% accuracy, your ancestors within 9 generations. And it didn't matter how rich you were, it
Wow.
didn't matter your education, it didn't matter where in the US you grew up. The fact that within 9 generations your ancestors lived in those areas made you much more willing to engage physically, because that's what the distance means, right?
Mm.
If your generations grew up in flat land where it was farming all the time, you didn't have to fight for resources all the time, 10 feet away you would already give space. You're less likely to engage physically.
Mm.
That's why I think, coming back to your comment, to take this long comment, Masi, is that's how important the genetics that you inherit are so important, because it, believe it or not, it will determine how you behave or what your preference is on how you behave. This is why it's so important that each individual be very careful with the decisions you make, because not only are you going to push back on any good progress that your ancestors have made, but you could also be giving bad habits to the ancestors that come after you. But I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts there. Before you answer, Masi, let's just go on a couple comments. Nonsky
Noski.
says, Malo Kaltama,
Hello.
welcome to the live
Welcome.
digital Kama session. Javier Fuapao says, Malo, it's been a while since I've been on here. Thanks for keeping up the good work. Malo
Hello,
Javier.
Javier.
And then last one, Ro Niwa, welcome. Malo, Malo.
Welcome. Welcome, Rodney. No,
What
to
are you,
just to
so
just
yeah,
to
any
yeah,
thoughts?
then that's, I mean, in a perfect world, you want both, right? Your heritage
Yeah,
and the language. In the perfect world, you want both and you try your best.
the
But
ideal.
the ideal, that's what you want because there's a lot of unique uh attributes that come from that. But if you told me to pick only one, what to keep, either, or what's more important, that's the better question. What's more important, you knowing your the blood that runs through you from your heritage, or learning the language? It's definitely, you, the blood that runs through you, because like you said, the genetics and what you teach your let's just say your prosperity to follow. To me, that's going to be more important than the language, if you told me to pick. Because to me, there's people who are like non-Tongans or non-Polynesians that's mastered the language. Does it that to me, that's just a form of communication. That's just a form of communication of what they're thinking in their head, and maybe they've learned certain cultural things, and that's what makes them be part and understand our uniqueness of Tongan culture. But what really makes you Tongan, and there's a sense of, and this is the thing, the word, the obligation or your fatongia to your family, is
Mhm.
it's a blood thing. It's a blood thing. You can have somebody master the language and here and there, but if they don't feel obligated to do anything, they ain't gonna do it. Who are they obligated to? They're not tied to a clan or to a certain part of a family. If let's just say they're they can they can have a discretion. It's almost like they have a free pass. They can choose it to do it or not. Most families, like you said, to like somebody who's been serving and been doing like their fatonia for many generations, it's gonna be innate in your own genetic makeup to do that, because it's in your blood. So that's what I'm just trying to say,
Mhm.
and that's interesting that we have this conversation, because I was just thinking, if you had to pick one, what's more important is to really know your heritage and your bloodline, in a sense, then and maybe forego the language. You had to just pick one. It's more knowing your heritage in
Yeah,
that sense than the language. So that's just me right there, Dua.
no, 100%. And I think this is important. We've mentioned it multiple times, but for those who criticize Tonga for quote unquote folding to Christianity, blah blah blah. You guys didn't fight. This is what we're talking about: prioritizing what's important and making sure that the most fundamental thing survives. Because and Maui Tekelangi mentioned this, especially using the metaphor um, of the kava plant,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
kava plant, when a storm comes and it breaks all the branches of the kava tree, apparently the solution to it is to go and trim everything off of the kava plant almost down to the root. And if you don't do that, the rot from the branches, the broken branches, and if you leave it, the rot will go down into the root and potentially kill the kava
mm,
plant itself, right? And this is what we're talking about here: language, tattooing, right? All these things, like some of the ancient religion, if you want to call it, like the
mm,
ancient practices, whatever you want to say, all these little branches.
mm,
If you don't understand what the root and what's most important, you will make the mistake of, oh, we're going to over invest in the language, we're going to over invest in tattoos, we're going to over invest in this and that, because you don't understand what's the most critical piece. What is at the center? What is at the root of the culture and the people? Um, and I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. This is what the Tuitonga and thousands of years of trying to preserve the root, right? Because that's in order to maintain a civilization, that's what you're doing. You're
yeah,
always, yes, the branches are going to grow, but the moment everything will collapse. And that's one of the things from my mind, as we're having this conversation about William Mariner's perspective and why he can't give us more details. We're grateful for what he did, but we're just trying to analyze what's important and how it matters to us as Polynesians in the modern world, where that's a real situation that the average Polynesian overseas is dealing with. Well, I guess I'm not a. I even seen it at some podcasts, right? Well, you're not. You're a plastic Polynesian because you don't speak the language, because you don't get your tattoos, because you aren't doing this, and that. Well, is really that's what determines whether you're a real Polynesian? Is the language? Is the
mm,
tattoo? No,
mm,
I think there's more stuff in there, and I
mm.
think that's important to have a conversation on that and to really distinguish what matters most in the culture.
Yep. Nope. Agree.
And when it boils down, what matters most is family.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's come back to Lolo.
Type of characteristic is pleasing to the gods, for them to all be the same, all on the same level, just everybody just sitting there, right, facing the priest. So when everything's prepared and ready, now the priest is sitting there with his hands clasped and is momentarily silent, sitting there. So just like a hala at a funeral, he's looking down, he's motionless, and then food is shared out, kava is being prepared, they start drinking, mixing, and then the matapules start acknowledging, or they begin to consult with the priest. Everybody's sitting. And usually the matapule or whoever is speaking will speak and they acknowledge, and sometimes the priest would answer, but for the most part, he's sitting there listening, just like at a hala, just like at a putu. He's sitting there listening. Kava's passed out, they're all drinking, and even the priest himself drinks kava as well. So this is the description of what happens when the priest starts speaking after the Matapulas and Eki start speaking. The priest starts speaking, and he says that he starts in a lower tone, and he gradually moves to a regular or a little higher pitched tone in his voice, and he speaks in the first person of God as if he is God. He shows no emotion, and sometimes he'll speak intensified and tremble often when he gets intense. Sometimes he'll cry, and sometimes he'll get choked up, and then eventually the entire emotion subsides. And then after he does his whole presentation, and after he's done, then he eats. And Murder said that he eats a lot. I don't know because if he's a big dude, but he thinks that because of the emotion and intensities and power that is in him makes him hungry enough to eat as much as two or three men would eat. Now that's what Mariner sees,
Mm.
but I think perhaps he probably didn't eat the day before, knowing that they were going to come, the warriors were going to come up, were going to show up, and then he probably thought he'd eat with them. That's probably why he ate so much. There is a club, a war club, sitting next to him for this purpose. He picks up the war club and he looks at it attentively, and he holds it and he turns it over and he looks at it and he's saying things, but Mary said, and then he looks up and he looks right and he looks left, and he didn't know exactly what part of the culture this was or what this was, but this is just what he described the priest doing. And then he looks right and does this a few times. And he looks up, looks left, and he strikes the ground with it, or he hits the post of the house with it hard. Said he hits it with considerable force. And I imagine it's the type of emotion you have, when you dance and you haka and, during the show. And I've seen it a few times where people, through the heat of the moment, will pick something up and break it, right? That's how they show. That's how they show their emotion. As far as I've seen guys at a college, luau, um, do this almost every year. That's in Snow College, and there'd be a plant, right? There'd be dancing and stuff, and then there'd be a plant somewhere on stage, and they would go over there and pick up that plant and smash the pot that the plant is in, and get dirt and everything everywhere. And for us, we understand, yeah, fine, like that type of emotion. I imagine that's what the priest was doing when he was doing that,
Oh yeah,
to show you how intensely convicted you are in what you are doing or saying, or in the entire uh, mental, cultural feel of what just happened, because they just got back from war. After all this, then the priest himself, because he spoke from God's perspective, he gets up from where he's sitting, and then he goes and he sits somewhere in behind everybody else. Now the place that they're facing is vacant.
You can sell this.
Mm. Any thoughts on that, Masi, while we
No, just it's just a reconfirmation, Dua, of why our ancestors were able to easily you know, were easily to were able to change to the new religion, convert to the new religion easily. Look at the old practice with how influenced the priest, the taula, with the chiefs, with the people. It's the same thing with the current Christianity of the Faifekao, working along with the whole Akis and with the Kakai, or you can say Tua, with everybody else. It's the same kind of thing, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, and they think that Tonga it's a form of colonization with Christianity coming in, and people were easily adapting Christianity. It's like, dude, if you take the same thing with this Daula, how 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 intimate his involvement with the people and the Matapure Ho'ekis with every aspect of the life. This is just after a war, and look, that Taula is
Mhm.
still part of the 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 event with the people. So it's the same thing with Christianity. What do you see? You won't go to a a gathering or a katuanga at any event. Most Polynesian event, I'll say this, particularly with the Tongan and Samoan communities, any big event, you won't see any event without a big one, especially a national or a village, without a faifekau or a taula there being present. So it just shows you how literally step by step it's really close to the Lotumui and the Lotumua, old religion and the new religion till now. Very little differences, but the big parts are kind of the same, and that's why it was an easy conversion for many of our people. That's what I was thinking in my mind when he's describing with the priest doing the kava, and he's doing with his whole kind of ceremony with the club and kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing. What the impact I'm trying to say, and involvement of Five Cows in today's Polynesian events. But that's what I'm thinking, Tua.
Yeah. Some of the things that I thought interesting, kind of going along with some of the things you shared, is I find it interesting because Tonga is very hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
There's
Mm,
layers, there's responsibilities, everyone has their place. But what happens when they come to the religious event? What happens when they come to the taula? They say
mm,
it's pleasing to the gods that you guys are all the same,
mm,
right?
mm,
They when the taula's there and you're sitting in this religious setting,
mm.
they're told that they're viewed all the same, which is kind of unusual because that to me tells me that, obviously there's the Christian influence of we're all children of God, we're all equal, we
Yeah.
have different stations in life, everyone has different stations in life, but when you peel that back in the religious setting, we're all equals, we're all children of God, we're as important as the next person. Now you take that to what Tupo the first did, and freeing the people. Really, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. I hear a lot of this online. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, everyone were slaves to the Tuitonga," and I can understand why they would say that. And I would say in some instances that's kind of true. Um, but the reality is, from listening to this experience by William Mariner and how in the religious setting everyone's equal, right?
Uh,
Everyone's equal. The gods prefer you to be equal. It's not us. That's not a far bridge to build for Tupo the First to understand. We probably need to expand the freedom and the capacity of the commoners, right? Like that would not necessarily be a totally foreign idea if in the religious settings everyone is intended to be somewhat equal, right?
mm,
And there's some interesting things from my mind is the freeing of the people, quote unquote. It wasn't necessarily, and I gotta be careful a little bit because it was freeing the people, and I guess you could view it as slaves, but that it was to me more a question of ownership of property. That
mm.
that is really the difference, right? Like, let's say this is one of the biggest criticisms people have of capitalism right now, with capitalism getting out of control.
Yeah.
What's happening? All the big corporations and all the top 1%,
Control the money flow. Yeah.
they're controlling all the property. That's
Mm.
really because they have the money flow. So that's really the problem. But would you say that the average person living in the West is a slave? Well, you could technically, depending on your interpretation, right?
Mm.
As for example, here in America, can you really own your home? Well, not
No.
really if you spend all your money to buy it, but if you miss your taxes for a few years, the government comes and takes it from you. So
Yeah.
one with the argument, you're a slave
Mm.
because the government owns everything. You are
Yeah.
subject to the government.
Yeah.
And we all saw with COVID, depending on the scenario, the government can even force you to not even leave your home.
Mm.
You
Mm.
can't even go to church. So you have to be as fair as you can be because we know for a fact, based off of George Vason's account, the Tongan commoners would freely leave and go to different chiefs,
Yeah.
even to,
At
even
will. At will. Yeah.
at will. But what was the problem? They couldn't own property because all the land belonged to the Tuitonga, and then the Tuitonga would divvy it up
Divvy it up.
to the people. right? Um, and it would get to the point where you would have certain families on opposite sides of the war. And then, William Mariner says they're going to go and they're going to fight people. And what they would do, oh, we're going to have a meeting to talk to our family because they chose to go and live with this chief, right?
Mm,
And because they chose to go live with that chief, they have a duty and an obligation to that chief,
mm.
right? So I, I
Ooh.
guess this is important to have this conversation because too many people just, I guess, press the easy button. Oh, all Tongans were slaves,
Mm,
and then everybody just runs with that narrative. I was like, well, I can understand why you took that definition, but depending on how you look at it, that might not be an accurate definition of how the Tongans really behaved. And then just the same thing with Christianity. Oh, you were colonized. The only, you guys were just folding. Well, that's one way to explain it. Another way to explain it is what you said. Actually, there were a lot of similarities with and I do want to add one more clarification, Masi, before I turn over
yeah,
the
go
time
for
to
it.
you. There is the old religion, the
Mm,
new religion, and then there was something in between. And and William Mariner and George Mason are kind of in the somewhere in between.
between.
And the proof is how Taufa Ahau behaved towards all the outer islands who had these gods. They were kind of more worshiping their ancestors, right?
Uh,
And how he would really cleanse all those religious sites. But the old religion that was in Mu'a, he didn't.
didn't touch. Mm,
He didn't touch. And you have to ask the question, why?
mm,
Why didn't he do that? Well, you can look at the Tuitonga. You could look at he was raised by the Taula of the old religion, one of the
mm.
most well recognized and most well respected Taulas or priests of the old religion, right?
Good one. Mm,
Um, and so, I mean, these are interesting things to think about. Just kind of glazing over, oh, they were slaves. Oh, you folded to Christianity. That's doing a disservice and doesn't really help anyone. But sounds like
mm.
you had some thoughts, Musty, or things there.
No, just with that word of obligation and fatongia, like I feel like that's a word that tongues like even come within family stuff. If families are on two different sides, if one certain family has made like let's just say an oath to a certain ho'eki, they're gonna defend their oath of their fatongia to that certain ho'eki if it comes even with family ties that they're even in the battles. It takes me back to the your conversation with Maui Tegelangi with the Tui Kanupolu with a famous warrior with the chestnut, Daifi. He
Yeah,
gave half, right? Because on the battles before they were on the same, but because he was from the outer islands and he was fighting against some of the Tui Kanupolu on Tongatapu, they were on the different sides, but they acknowledged each other. But he had a Fatongia to the outer island uh Tongans that were kind of coming to Tongatapu, and then the Tui Kanupolu having his obligation to the chiefs and areas within the Hifo side. So I think that's a very tonguing thing to with that fatongia, with our oath that whoever we make our oath with uh, is a big deal. Even comes to our own family clan if we're on different sides. But I just find that very interesting because I feel like that's such a very tongue-in thing with your fatongia doing it. Even we may complain here and there certain things, but when we have an oath to do something, at the end of the day, most people will come around to to achieve it or do it. But I just find that very interesting when you were sharing that with a different family with George Mason and
yeah.
then being different sides of the battles and even costing the life. Like it's crazy, you know?
And this is where we're coming back to, Masi. If I had to choose language, tattoos, ancient cultural dances, some of these
Mm,
other things, or hold on to the fatongia, the obligations, right?
mm, mm.
The nature of distinguishing family ties and your duty.
Yeah,
You know what I would
yeah.
pick? I would pick those things over tattoos.
Yeah.
over traditional dance and everything. That's not to say that those things don't add value, they add value, but you really have to think to understand the root and what
Mm,
you can compromise on and where you cannot compromise on,
mm,
right? and
yeah.
and and that story, and I didn't know that that's our uncle Uluamu's name. I guess he was a twin, and
Uluave, the Uluave
yeah,
and Ulabu kind of names where they
yeah,
come from. Yeah.
yes, that's tied to that one chief that took those two heads, right?
Yeah.
That those are fascinating stories because it's those stories that help us understand what it means to be Tongan, what it means to be Polynesian. I don't
Mm,
care how many tattoos you get, it doesn't give you the fortitude or the dedication to follow through with that, right?
mm,
To have that type of commitment and willingness to sacrifice. And it's very rare. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very rare for that type of behavior to happen for the first time with the first person who's ever done that. The
mm,
reason why these chiefs behave that way is because their ancestors usually had behaved that way for thousands of years, which makes it much easier for them to behave that way,
mm,
right?
mm,
And this also comes back to what we were talking about earlier, why Christianity was so well accepted. When you understand the story of Taufa, how he was raised by the ancient religion, by one of those priests, and he obviously would have had access with Tautai, understanding the principles and the concepts of the ancient religion. That's why. That's probably why Taufa'ahau had very specific tests for Pitavi,
mm,
right? Because he not only understands physical power, physical world influence, and political power, but being raised by Tautai also told him this is how you measure and understand what a god is.
mm, mm.
Who knows? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. Obviously, I wasn't there, but we have to look at these things and understand why. Because I'm one of those things don't happen by chance. Because I am a person who believes in God, I believe things happen for a reason. There was a reason why Taufaha was sickly. There was a reason why the only person that could heal him was Kautai. Right?
Mm,
There's a reason why Taufaha and Laufini Tonga, when they were young chiefs, crossed paths before Laufini Tonga became Tuitonga. Right?
mm.
Like these things are all interconnected, and it's fascinating when you look at those things. But this is kind of an interesting way to look at it, and that's why we appreciate Lolo and Kawa University for
Yeah.
creating this content, because as we listen through this content, it and use the approach and the psychology of the Kava sessions that our ancestors have done for thousands of years, we can learn things and at least explore new ideas, and who knows where it'll lead us. But
Correct.
anything else, Masi, before I head back
Nope. Nope. We can go back to our man Kava University.
in core?
Oh, I'm not hearing it, Tua. Are you hearing
Oh,
it?
I muted it because it had
The commercial.
the commercial. Sorry. God,
No, all good.
this
All
is
good.
technical difficulties. You should hear
Now
it now.
the place that
Yep.
that
All good.
they're facing is vacant, and typically either the highest chief, so either Finau or another higher chief would go and take that place, and then they would come and surround and continue mixing. They'll continue drinking kava until the kava was done. So they basically created a circle after the ceremony itself. Mariner says that the priest's violent agitation and emotion that he shows when he's um, speaking um, could be confused or could be mistaken as him just trying to convinced. It's almost like uh, it could have been fake, is basically what he was saying. But Mariner said that he didn't have a reason to believe that. He really believed that the priest was that emotional. It seemed genuine. It seemed uh, real. And for those of us who go to funerals and know the feel of when people speak at a funeral, they really feel this stuff. They really feel this power. They really feel when they're talking, because of the souls that are in there. For some reason, it generates energy, and that energy is shared throughout the group. When you're sitting there talking, somebody's speaking, and they're speaking truth and they're speaking power. That it isn't fake. We feel that. We know that. And especially since they just came back from Tonga, killing some of their brothers and sisters in Nuku'alofa, we know that whatever was being spoken, and it was a lot of counsel as far as um, someone speaking in the place of God, what is more pleasing, how to behave now, how to act, the characteristics, the attributes of who we are and how we are, was genuine for, at least for Mariner to say, yeah, he's heard priests and pastors preach and get emotional and agitated and so forth to give it the look of power and the look of um, the Holy Ghost or the Spirit or energy. But he said as he sat there, he didn't think that any of that was scripted, or perhaps it was practiced and performed before, but the energy and the power was always the same. Mariner himself said that he believed it was the actual Spirit of God, or that spirit that the priest was speaking with was of genuine power. Mariner said this happens a lot. There's a lot of visitations of spirits, primarily to women, especially in dreams. And when they do get in this position, they speak as if being inspired by either a spirit from the past, or the God himself, or kings and chiefs from before. They believe that they have the capability of being possessed of these spirits and these souls, and they speak for them, or that those people and God speak through them when they have these type of ceremonies. And for the most part, you can kind of tell and see that because the language is different. The language is as proper as possible. The language is as eloquent, the best words that you cannot mistake for anything other than the genuine feel or the soul of someone who's speaking for God himself. And when priests or people start receiving revelation or inspiration from God, they take kava to that person and give them kava to drink, because they feel that the kava opens up the soul and the mind, so that you're in more the frequency as far as being able to speak freely or more openly, or have more inspiration or revelation. They take kava to this person, whoever is speaking, because they believe that kava actually allows the body or the mind to be in tune with the spirits or with the gods. I kind of know what that's like. Sometimes when I drink kava, either a lot or too much, I feel like I'm being inspired. Oh, Lord. But it does.
Marie, Marie, Marie. Masi, you need some inspiration?
Need inspiration or just some relaxation?
Is that what I
uh,
feel every time with Takava is the spirit? But
yeah.
yeah. One of the things that stuck out to me
Mm,
is, you notice, it sounds like Urukalala is there somewhere. I don't know if he's sitting with the men or not.
mm,
He could have been. But I find it interesting, like we discussed earlier, in the spiritual setting, everyone's the same. But what happens when we transfer from the spiritual setting to the temporal setting? Then the hierarchy comes in,
mm,
right? Which is very interesting, because when you look at Genesis and you look at Adam and Eve, it doesn't seem like there's a hierarchy when they're in the garden before the fall, right?
Mm,
There doesn't seem to, or at least it's not explicitly shared that there's a hierarchy. But once the fall comes into play, then God says, okay, there has to be some hierarchy. You have to do X to get Y. This is what you got to do,
mm,
right? But I find it interesting that in the spiritual setting, everyone's the same. But then when you come back to the temporal setting, then there's hierarchy, and that's what we were discussing on the one on the other on the one of our other live digital kava sessions. Is when you look at the behavior of the Tongans as shared by William Mariner, and let's use the example of the families meeting before the war,
mm,
right? Mariner says it's like super friendly, everyone's talking nicely to each other, and that's one of the things that I notice is, and we notice this, it's almost like everyone understands that there's more to life than just this life. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you,
mm,
right? Now, and you see what William Mariner is explaining is he's explaining it's like, man, this is kind of a unusual situation. He feels that the spiritual setting, though you could question it, we can question everything, but it seems genuine. And in the spiritual setting, there is a big difference between the spiritual setting and the temporal setting. And I feel like that is why they're able to behave the way they're behaving. It's that knowledge of an afterlife that they're like, hey, cousin, uncle, I know we're on opposite sides of the battle. We may end up killing each other, but you know what? In Pulotu, everything's going to be fine. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like,
mm,
you only behave that way because you have what we would typically say in the church, an eternal perspective,
mm,
right? When all you have in your mind is here and now, you behave very differently. And these are some of the interesting things. Just because you disagree with someone, just because you're on opposite sides of a quote unquote battle with someone, doesn't mean you have to hate them, and it doesn't mean they hate you. That's
mm,
something that I think our culture today could learn a lot, right?
mm.
Is just because someone says no to you or doesn't give you what you think you deserve, doesn't mean you have to hate them, right? And it doesn't mean that that's the end of the world. Like, I don't know. That was some of the interesting that's popping up to me because really what I'm really interested is William Mariner is giving us a description on how they behave, but I'm trying to use that to try and understand why our ancestors behave the way they behave. And that's what kind of my mind goes through when I'm listening through what William Mariner is describing. But any thoughts on that, Masi?
Yeah, no, and I'll just tag along with your thought with the eternal perspective, knowing that this is not the end of our journey of life. This is only part of it, and I feel like many many people of the during that time understood that principle of understanding that this is only like a step into the next journey. We may be on different sides of the battle and maybe that's why each families were, even though they had their fatomia um um or oath, they had to obliged with, because they made maybe a covenant or something, or it's just in our characteristics as Tongans in fulfilling our duty, that this was only a temporary time. And that's the same kind of principle with, even with the Christianity faith now, that there is another realm after this life. When this is done, there is another part of the journey that we're going to go through in the spirit world, kind of thing, which is, you can say, is pulotu, what they're trying to say. So
Mhm.
this light, I think it's even in the definition of what Tongans refer in the language is this light, my money, meaning just this light. So this is just this light. There's another light coming within the spiritual realm with Pulotu. So I think that's a
Oh,
that's what I'm thinking, right?
I did not realize that until you said it, Masi.
Yeah.
That
Well, that's
ma money is mama ni.
yes.
This light,
Mm. Well,
which
that's what I'm
yeah,
thinking, because if you think about it, what does Christ and angels kind of refer to? People when they describe like an angel or something, glory or righteousness, it's they said it's a different light that even the world can't see, and that's what I'm saying with the definition. Even with the Tongan, every other Polynesian language, to they use beneath lalolangi, which is like beneath the sky, to 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 identify that this world. Tongan is one of the few or the only, and regarding your last episode, we're probably the more closest to what the Polynesian language was back in those days as a Polynesian nation. We're the only one that still kept that this light, ma mani, right? So I just find that very interesting in the spiritual sense to why many of the people were like, we'll go, maybe somebody's head will get clubbed or whatever, but this is only this light. We're only gonna be here this light for temporary before we transition to Pulotu. That's what I'm just trying to
mm,
explain to because even the language with ma money, we're just in this light. There's another light that's waiting for us in Pulotu. But I just find that very
very
interesting.
interesting. No, that's a very I never thought of. It makes total sense of ma money because you're
Mm,
saying mama and then ni meaning this light, right? And
mm,
here's the other interesting thing. Because of that, Masi, in the gospel, there are two types of seasons or times:
mm,
the day where work can be done, and night when there's no work to be done, right? And so even the concept of the creation and mama, interesting.
mm,
I
mm,
never thought of that before.
mm, mm. Yeah. So I just find that very interesting to with especially like where we talked about what we've kept and the reason why we were not being able to be colonized. Like certain, who knows if we were colonized, that maybe that phrase we would have called like everything else, lalo langi.
Lost.
Yes, we
Yeah.
wouldn't say my money. Like, is to me, that's a like what you said. It's like, man, why? And then when you say why, if you think about it, like why my money? Break it down. This light, and then when you understand further, scripture studies with the different kind of lights and the special light, and this is like a phase kind of thing. Because I just find it funny that we use that term to describe this earth life, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Mm,
Maria, that was a good one. That I like that. And thanks for sharing that because I never put two and two together. So that's interesting.
mm,
All right.
Open up, or it does take the mind to places to, where people just speak, and you see how people play around, and you see how people speak. It's so free and it's so open, and uh, there can be no taking anything in offensive. You know, everything is for some reason either spiritual, entertaining, or comical, or clever, but we all feel, right? There's a vibe, there's a feel to um, when you partake kava like that. In this case, and in a lot of religions, they still take kava for religious purposes, and perhaps it started from those days where you take kava to people who are receiving inspiration and revelation, and because it puts them in tune with the spirit or with the gods. Mariner said that there was one instance where one of these priests started speaking and receiving inspiration and revelation. They took kava to him, and then after the kava was done, he had no inspiration or revelation, and the people were surprised. They're like, "What? He's not receiving any inspiration." So they took the kava away from him, and they were disappointed that he wasn't receiving revelation. And perhaps that was because he was just kona. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes he's just kona. Maybe he was totaloing. Maybe he was just talking, clowning on everybody. So sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's just, come on, man. Yeah, inspiration. Yeah. Oh my God, what how they're like, what? Nah. We came to get inspiration. Take that kava back. Let's go. It's customary for when you get sick or ill to take that ill person to the priest to diagnose them, this ill or sick person. Then they diagnose them, and then they start getting things and start experimenting on plants and so forth, and try to heal this person. And after 3 or 4 days, if the person isn't healed, they take them to a different priest, give them kava. What do you feel? What is your revelation, your inspiration? What plants do we need? That person comes up with plants. And this is a lot of the ways how they came up with the plants and the medicines. And we all know that Tonga has a lot of medicines, a lot of medicine people. And it comes from trees and plants and everything else. This is kind of how it all started, right? They take kava to a priest, make them drink. What plants do we need to use to heal this person? They try their ingredients or their potion or formula through some plants. 3 or 4 days later, he's not healed. The family says, "All right, it's not working with this guy. Let's take him to another priest. Give him another priest.
Mm.
Give him kava. Kava was that. You got to give the guy. You got to give the priest kava. Let him receive
Oh,
revelation, inspiration of how to heal this
Mm.
person, and then he'll figure out which plants to use." And they did that.
You had something you want to mention, Masi?
yeah. Well, it just took me with the whole. Oh,
Oh, are you there, Masi? Did we lose you? Looks like we may have lost Mr. Aotearoa. With that, we'll jump into some of the comments here. Devita Tonga Shumako says, Malo ngawe motama. Devita, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. Nelly Fale, thank you very much. We also have Hakau Pikula says, Malo fellas, welcome, welcome. Tees says, Malo, Malo, appreciate it, Tees. Welcome, welcome to the live digital kava session. Stan Taunga Kava asks, how much stronger is kava when consuming it raw versus dry? The raw kava is much, much stronger, from my understanding, Sam. And so it is way more powerful. The drying of the kava is done so that it can just last longer. But in all honesty, the straight from the plant, while it's still raw, is a much more potent one. Um, and so yeah, so that's really what my understanding is between those two differences, right? That the dry is almost as strong, but the raw is much stronger, but the dry just lasts longer. Hey, Polly Prince, yes, we're looks like Mr. Aotearoa is trying to make it back. Looks like he had hanef malohe kava. Maybe the kava in Aotearoa is getting the inspiration is getting in the way of Elon Musk's satellites for us today.
hey, skataki tautama na si ngalo ge tau laptop pe mate ai pe. So I was able to charge it.
Oh, can you see me, Masi?
Yep, yep, I can see you. I can
Oh,
see you.
you're back. You're back.
Yep. No, I was gonna say I forgot to charge my laptop, so sorry for that little slight interruption, everyone.
See, I
Forgive me
was I
on that.
was thinking the kava from Aotearoa was too strong. It got
Too
in the
strong,
way.
too
The
strong.
inspiration got in the way of Elon Musk's satellite connection.
No, no, do it now. I was just gonna say when Lolo when Lolo was explaining like taking the kava to certain people, that remind me of Taufa How going to multiple priests, and I'm sure when he went to these multiple priests, it's almost like because kava was it's even now it's still valued. Back in those days, it's a high value. That was like your form of payment, and I feel like the kava is so important that even I feel like when you were, like a tama ohutada tao, like a tattoo artist, that was something that you gave if you wanted like a tattoo. Like to me, it was kind of a form of transaction with
It's like
kava
the
that you
currency. It's like the
It was like the
currency.
currency, along with the along with the livestock and maybe the 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 yam and stuff that you had. But I think in value, kava was probably the most important thing to take. But I'm just saying, like, you know that's kind of was our way of our people of getting, maybe asking for help. And it was like a payment kind of thing, was taking a piece of kava plant and presenting it to that family that maybe you're requesting some assistance. So that's what I was just trying to explain when Lolo was kind of going with, if a certain priest, and that's what happened with Taufa How when he was sickly. No other priest was able to help heal him until he went to Mua with the kautai. So yeah, and in the form of going all over, you got to have lots of kava. If you're going to multiple people, asking, you're most likely having lots of kava to kind of give away to use for that
Payment.
particular person. Yeah, for payment. So that's all
Mm,
I wanted to say.
okay, Maro.
Eventually, they healed, right? But they didn't always heal on the first try. But they did come up with a whole bunch of medicines that way as well. Pulotu is a spirit world. It's a spirit world for the gods. It's a spirit world for lower ranking gods. That's what they believe Pulotu is. We believe Pulotu right now, these days, in context, as the next life or the spirit world or the place where the spirits go when people die. That's what Pulotu is. That's what they've always believed. Mariner mentions a young chief that saw a woman over a few nights of dreams. Didn't know who she was exactly, but when he'd wake up, he kept seeing this or kept telling Mariner. Mariner would go and visit him often, and he would tell him, "Yeah, I saw this woman again. Didn't know who it was, but they because of those type of dreams, those type of things, they absolutely believed there was a spirit world somewhere. That woman would tell him things, give him instructions. So for them, that was enough for them to already know instinctively that our minds here on earth are what we see and what we think and what we learn is what it is. But there is a greater power, there is a government in the next life that run whatever it runs, and it allows them to communicate to us through whatever this technology is called dreaming. This is how they communicate to us. After a few days, the guy died, and they all assumed, oh, that woman probably called them back, told them to go back, or whatever that was. So the belief in the next life has always been inside of our culture. This young chief was one of the ones laying at one of the priest's house, right? The one that diagnoses, laying there, and that's how Mariner was able to go visit him a few times, and he even predicted his own death, that he was going to die through the communication of the next realm, that he was going to be taken. And a lot of our people today believe that too. My dad, he's almost died, had a stroke and whatnot, and he felt he saw things. He saw people. He saw his mom and his aunties, and they sent them back, according to him. So right now everybody believes that. As far as those
Mm,
religious, we all know information is documented now through the scriptures and so forth. But before any of that, before any of the scriptures, documentations, or any readings of anything, these people believe that. We've always believed stuff like that. Mariner spoke with Finau's son, right?
Hmm.
quick question, Masi.
What's up?
Do you know how rare it is for indigenous people to believe in an afterlife? Let's see if we can ask Rock this, because I'm
That's
interested.
interesting.
Yeah.
I would see. I don't know about. I don't. I'm not too sure, Tor. I'm not too sure. Indigenous people believing in the afterlife. Um, yeah, that's something interesting to kind of know more about.
Let's pull this up and let's see what Grok says.
Mm. But
Um,
no, I was just gonna mention Tua with you know what Lolo's mentioning. We've always believed that, and there's a good portion, I would say, even today with Polynesians overseas and back in the islands, that we still have that strong belief. But like is it gonna be tested in the next? Which because now we're gonna talk about for the future generations, right? If they're gonna still have that belief, because we can honestly say a lot of the let's just say Palangis or people who are non-Polynesians, most of them, a lot of people have that same belief, but over time, it's changed, right? It's kind of moved over time, and that's why it's so important. Like what we said to with the language, if you had to choose your language or your family genealogy and history and your heritage, understanding that, because if your prosperity does not understand your family legacy, it can get lost and you can lose it. So it's going to be very difficult because we're not going to be exempt if we don't continue what our ancestors have kind of taught us with the understanding and thought of there is an afterlife, and what you do here is going to mean it's going to be it's going to mean something in the afterlife where you end up. So that's just me when we were talking about that
mm,
with Lolo talking about us and always kind of understanding that with the afterlife and using the example of his father when he was sent back after kind of visiting the ancestors visiting him and he was not ready to go yet. But yeah.
mm. All right, let's do this. Let's see what Grok says here. Oh,
Super
says
Grok.
belief. Yes, belief in the afterlife among indigenous peoples globally was nearly universal, though the specifics varied widely by culture and region. Most indigenous societies held spiritual worldviews that assumed some form of existence after death, often tied to nature, ancestors, or cosmological cycles. Due to the diversity of indigenous cultures spanning Africa, the Americas, Australia, Asia, and the Pacific, no single belief system applies, but patterns emerge from anthropological and historical records. In the Americas, many Native American tribes believed in a spiritual afterlife. For example, the Lakota envisioned a spirit world where souls joined ancestors,
Mm,
while the Navajos saw death as a transition to another existence, with rituals to guide the deceased. The Inca and the Maya had complex afterlife cosmologies, with realms like the Mayan Xibalba or Inca's upper world for the virtuous. In Mesoamerica, over 80% of documented cultures had afterlife beliefs involving judgment or soul journeys per archaeological evidence like burial goods and codices. African indigenous groups also, as the Yoruba and Akan, often believed in dynamic afterlife where ancestors remained active in the living world. Ethnographic studies suggest over 90% of pre colonial African societies had afterlife concepts, often involving reincarnation or ancestral realms. In Australia, Aboriginals peoples' dream time included beliefs in spirits returning to the land or ancestral planes with no clear end to existence. Similarly, Polynesian and Pacific Islander cultures like the Maori believed death as a passage to a afterlife is pretty common.
yeah. Mm, mm,
So this is this is how it makes it interesting, right?
hmm
If that's the case, and if we believe that God is the God of all people, and God says he loves all his people, his children, why is it that some people freak out when we say Hikuleo is God? They, and I understand. To be fair, I'm fine with, hey, Tua, it's unlikely. right? But
mm,
it's possible because because look, all of these people had beliefs in the afterlife, and how did they come up with those beliefs? How is it that everyone, 90% of the world, came up with these ideas if it wasn't God telling them? I don't know. What do you
mm. Well, see, no, I'm along the lines with you. Tua Hikudeo is God, right? The God of Israel is that same God that we all worship. Now, I think it's just like what you said. There's a little bit loose, right? There's a been a loose, let's just say, maybe a pulling away from that concept because it even happened with during the time of the civil wars and was part of the cleansing of Taufahau. And because that was more recent, right? It's just been a popular belief with many people thinking that that was the so-called traditional gods because and it's just the same thing with the world today with people if you're not teaching that there is a god like the god of Hikudeo or the our heavenly father kind of god that you can lose the definition of that and you can even see even the definition of god can be used in different kind of ways so I mean it's one of those things that we can lose it if it's not being taught. That's just me. I don't know if there's anything else that you think, Tua,
Yeah.
but
I just find it interesting because we've released a couple videos on Hikuleo, right?
mm,
And we dug into this a little bit, right? Masi, we searched online on where this idea of Hikuleo being a female, and
correct,
there is no like documented oral history, which
correct.
still could be questionable, but there, and we spoke with certain historians like Xiaoxi Ilayu, and he's like, he doesn't
Yeah.
know where that comes from, but somehow that's what a lot of people believe,
Mm, mm, mm.
so it's kind of interesting that people will jump out and mock that idea. And I understand it's a stretch for some people and it's kind of from left field, but they don't even realize that what they actually say they believe in, what's reality, has little to no backing to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
don't
and,
know.
and it's stuff like that, Tua. Like you and I, like you said, we try to find who's the one that said that these female looking figurines. It's more like an ancestor of like maybe a powerful, what Lola was talking about. Maybe there were some women that
Yeah,
really had some spiritual gifts and some parts of the village maybe had a certain female looking person and they kind of worship like an ancestor of that particular woman and became a thing and then we just don't know who gave the name that this was Hikudeo and look
exactly.
we have many of our own people thinking that that's Hikudeo, that's the figurines of Hikudeo. It's a woman,
Exactly.
so it's
It
it's
could be
hilarious.
like, it could be just like you're saying. Maybe there was a taula or someone in the village that was recognized. It could have been they just had dreams of a woman that would come and tell them stuff, just like
Mm,
this young gentleman did, right?
mm,
And maybe that dream told them information that actually came true. Then everybody's, oh, I guess this is a god we should consider.
correct.
Make some figurines, and then all of a sudden that became fact. When you're just like, what? That came out
Yeah.
of absolutely nowhere. Here's
Mm,
some questions here, or some comments. Sam Taungakava says there are some accounts of shamans witnessed by missionaries using raw kava to enter a higher state of trance to communicate with the deities. Any chance there's some truth to this?
I
Any
have
thoughts
no
on that,
idea.
Masi?
I'm not too familiar with this with Sam Tangakawa's question here, Tua. I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
He, he kind of asked earlier what's the difference between the consuming of the raw kava and the dried kava. I've never drank raw kava before, besides when I had a toothache growing up in Tonga,
Mm, mm,
right? And then you chew on the kava because it just numbs
nice.
so it's much stronger. That's my understanding is the raw kava is much stronger. So if it does put you into some kind of wavelength or whatever, the raw kava would make that much stronger. So I can see that. Is there truth to it? That seems like that's probably true. That they probably did use the raw kava more often. Now, if you're saying, is it true that they spoke to the deities? Honestly, there
Who
are
knows?
familiar spirits that are going around. Just because you're getting influenced by something doesn't always mean it's God. It could
Mm,
be the Hawa Tevolo just walking around having nothing better to do.
correct. Well, that's the thing, right? Not every spiritual if you get possessed spiritually, it's not always the good spiritually
Positive.
possessed. Yes.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing, and that's why it's important. Well, and that's probably the reason why Dava How did some cleansing with some of the oral history with Maui Tekelangi sharing. Some people think they were praying to the traditional the Lotu Mu'a, but it was not, and that's
Yeah.
why he went and cleansed some of these fortifications. So yeah, so that's you got to decide if it's a good spirit or not. It's really up to the family. It's really up to the family. They say,
You
they take their kava and then they take it to a taula and they're like, gi yongo kovie gi taula go ni de aluge taula ke.
the
It's
other one.
really all, yeah, it's all depend on the people, and that's to me, and that's why it's important for you to sense that righteousness, or is this just a little something else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam's cracking up on the not that Tatevolo Hawa. It's funny though, Sam, because that's the danger of just reaching out to the spiritual realm for the sake of reaching out. Oh, it's no different than us here in this physical world. Or Wakakaiya, the people who are usually doing good things, they're too busy doing good things. If you're a good spirit, you're probably busy doing good things. If you're a bad spirit, you're the one that has the time to go around and mess around with people for the sake of messing with people, which is why it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, Here's a comment here also by Sam. It says, it's unfortunate that our Ho'eki class didn't believe that commoners deserve a place in Pulotu like them. Well, see, that's the thing that's interesting, Sam,
Mm,
with what William Mariner is explaining. In the spiritual setting, everyone was the same, right? And that's where we're, and then also mentioning that there was the we'll call it the root original religion, and then there's the Christianity, and then there was something that was in the middle. That's
mm,
when William Mariner are coming. That we may not know whether that is really what the original religion thought, but as it decayed and as the empire lost its stability, and there's more little chiefdoms and more little priests developing their own versions of what the truth was, then kind of weird doctrines like, oh yeah, only the Ho'eki are going to go to Pulotu, some of those develop. It's no different than, from my perspective, what happened with Christianity when the 12 apostle passed away and all this other stuff. All of a sudden, everyone and their dog had a church and a gospel and a version to
mm,
to explain. Any
mm.
thoughts on that, Masi?
No, like when did this idea kind of come about that only the Ho'ekis have a place in Poloto?
There, there are
Yeah.
some oral histories that said that Kakao Ho'ekipe o Wagi Pulot, and
Oh,
that
okay.
if you were a tu'a, you were like the lower class, or what did Dad said that they're called, the avare, I think is what they
Mm,
call it as
mm,
well.
mm.
That they were, some of the oral histories or old ideas were they didn't go to Pulotu, but then
Okay.
you go to George Mason,
I know.
and there
Yeah, yeah.
and there are people who weren't Aki and stuff that were, they
Had the
said, are
knowledge.
going to Pulotu,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and
So it just depends.
I've always just also heard some oral. See, and this is the thing with oral history. Everyone has your own pickings on which one you come across with. But I've heard some oral histories of saying that right in this light, everyone, like you said, we're a hierarchical society, but in the next life, and that's why if you were gonna be if death was going to come to you in this life, everyone is going to have another start in the Pulotu realm kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's why I was like, just depending with Sam, with what you're thinking. I've heard some, if that's the case. I haven't heard any of those, but obviously Tua and Fade have heard some of those oral histories. But like I said, it even George Mason with his encounter with some of the kids, and these were kid levels of just people in the village, just having that knowledge of saying that Pulotu exists, and that's where this person was gonna go and dwell at. So he's not really dead. He's just going at a different realm. But that's just my thoughts there.
Yep, 100%. We'll come back to Lolo here.
He was a tributary chief in Hamor at this point in time. So he was a tributary chief in Hamor. Remember Finau Fisi, which is Finau Ugala's uncle, Finau Mafanga's brother, he was tributary chief in Fiji. So Finau Ugala's son, tributary chief in Hamor, told Mariner that he was visited. They say visited, and it's interchangeable with possessed by Tukuaho. Visited in the dreams or even possessed and seen him in visions or whatever. And Mariner asked him how he knew it was Tukuaho. And Mogangoa told him that it's a feeling, right? He said he felt a burning, he felt heat. And that heat and that energy was a signal or that part of information that confirmed that that was Tukuaho. Remember, Tukuaho was the one that was in Tonga, the one that cut off 12 of his cook's arms to mark him as his. Tupo and Finau went and killed, right? But just that piece of information, he felt heat, he felt warmth, and then information came to him in his mind that told him this is Tukuaho. A lot of the similarities as far as the spiritual context of information, how we learn, how we know, how we sense things through influence. These guys already had that concept. They already knew and believed that type of stuff. Fast forward to today, and it's the exact same thing or the same processes in the same ways when we read the scriptures and feel those things, and then
Very
information
interesting.
is confirmed.
Mm.
Finau Ugala himself would often tell Mariner that he has been inspired by, visited, or even possessed by Mui Mui. Mui Mui was the king before Tuguaho. Remember, Tuguaho is Tupotoa's father. Tupotoa is
And
Taufa
this is the
Zor's
Tutanukupolu guys they're
first father.
talking about there.
So
Yeah.
Tukuaho and Mui Mui.
Finau knew generationally these men that were in government even before the recorded stuff that we know, right? Mui Mui was before Tuguaho, which means it was in the mid to early 1700s. Finau told Mariner that he used to be visited by Mui Mui. So these are some of the things that, and I don't know why Mariner chose to put this part of the book in here, but this is kind of some of more of the personality and the behavior and the characteristics of Tonga from a spiritual point of view. I know we went from war to this, and this is part two. It's basically part two, which shows our relationship with the gods, our relationship with the ancestors through dreams, through gava, through inspiration, through revelation, and how we kept that communication the same way even before Christianity showed up. We communicated through influence and through the mind and through the spirit and through the dreams and so forth. So anyway, that's part two. I know it's been a while. That's part two. I talked to one of my boys out in the Bay. He said that he's waiting for the next, and some of them are waiting. I know some of you guys are waiting for the next. And he said he wanted to read it, and I was like, "Don't trip. I have time out here. I'll get back to it." As you know, I'm over here working at this restaurant, and I'm gonna start buckling down this year. We got to finish this book this year, right? So we can talk more about and open up more of the history of this point in time before writing, before reading, before Christianity, before anybody could start making up their own history. We're going to get through this book so that we can have a reference point of the behaviors and characteristics of how Tongans were during this point in time. So,
Mm.
stick with me. I'll be back. Try to be back tomorrow morning and do this before I open up, and we'll get through this. Okay? Ldks.
Malo,
Nice.
malo. Any thoughts, Mas?
No, that's a true thing. I go back to what we kind of shared on the live digital kava session in the past with when Fade forgot some people's names in the Tuitonga list, right? They tried to appear to Fade, they weren't able, so they went to his spouse and appeared to her to say that they need to be included into the Tuitonga when when Dad was compiling the list of the Tuitonga list, according to the langis that he was able to identify. So that is a very real thing, and that's a very important concept of how Polynesians stay in touch with their ancestors. Not all ancestors are always good. I might have to put that in there. People always say ancestors with a good thing. There's some bad. We all. It's like any family members we have. If you have an extended family, there's the funny ones, but not I just want to put that in there. There's always some ancestors that you say, you know what, just wait for me in Pulotu. I don't need you right now. Just wait
Yeah.
for me in Pulotu. But those kind of things. So I just thought I'll just share that. But that's a very real thing with this part of the Mariners account with him explaining, and Lolo also doing a good job explaining with our experiences in the with Pulotu and with our ancestors. So that's me, Dua. If there's anything else you wanna kind
Yeah,
of
there's
conclude.
the couple of things I want to kind of re-emphasize. We've touched it a bit throughout this. It is quite clear that our ancestors were very spiritual in nature.
Mm,
Spiritual knowledge, spiritual truth was like common for our ancestors, right? And it
mm,
wasn't unusual for them to say a thought or an idea came to my mind and it was from a spiritual source. Okay.
mm,
This is why Christianity and being religious is such a big part of our culture today. Because how do our God is a God who is spiritual in nature,
mm,
right? And I'm not talking about his physical nature, just how he behaves, how he communicates. He talks to our spirit and he gives us information through the Holy Ghost to our spirit to find out whether the Bible, the Book of Mormon, or whatever you believe in is true. You know it through spiritual means. So to really just kind of reemphasize, this is why Polynesians are so religious on average,
yes.
right? Because it's a continuation of what our ancestors have done for thousands of years. This is why I'm very hesitant to accept the idea Christianity is a form of colonization. Is it really? If you already had that type of spiritual tendency, if
Mm,
you already believed in the afterlife, if you already believed
great point.
in a God, right? Is it really? And this is the danger of, this is what we discussed on one of our live podcasts in the past. The whole concept of decolonization is an idea from the people who did all the colonizing. So if you went from colonization and you're now adopting decolonization, you're just moving from the idea of the colonizer to another idea of the colonizer. If you really want to say I want to disengage from quote unquote colonization, you have to really just say, hey, you know what were the behavior of my ancestors and what they really believed, and then all of a sudden you'll be shocked to find out a lot of things in Christianity is the same thing your ancestors believed
Mm,
in gods, in the spiritual realm, in afterlife,
mm,
right? In that families will cross paths again in the spirit world. Like these are things that are really important for us to have conversations on and really revisit. I think having these conversations are critical because not just because the content itself will cover what we're talking, but it what we need to talk about, but it will give us ideas to talk about things that are important. Like earlier, Masi, when we're talking about language, is language the most important thing? Is tattoos the most important thing? Is it really? What does it mean to be Polynesian? Right? Especially with all these stuff going on about plastic Polynesian, and you're
Mm,
not a Tongan if you're doing this or doing that. To me, those are all little branches, right?
yeah.
I'm interested in getting to the root. I want to understand what the most fundamental things. And then once I understand that, then I will go out to the branches. But I also understand as I go out to the branches, if I have to concede something, I'm going to concede the branches, but I will not concede the root. And I think that's a really important thing. I really
Mm.
appreciate Lolo making the content. It does take a lot of time, it takes commitment. That's why we're always grateful for all of our listeners and our followers for the support. You know, Masi's the only one who makes millions of dollars on our podcast. So
Owa. Kuhail firma paanga milin. Ah, owa, owa.
line up. I want you
Line na
guys to
togi
line up
diat.
in Aotearoa. Um, but Mike, I'll give my closing comments, and then Masi can close us out for this live digital kava session.
Oh,
I just want
oh,
to
too. I was gonna say, are we gonna close it out, or you think we're gonna touch on sports? Do we have time to touch on sports, or
do. If you
it's
got
up to
time,
you?
we'll go into the sports.
Yeah,
You got
we. I
time?
got some time. I got some time. I got some
Okay,
time.
all right. With that being said, the segment on William Mariner is officially closed.
Mm.
We really want to, we're going to, what this is the fun about doing live digital kava sessions, eh?
Mm.
We finished the bucket or the kumete, and everyone thought it was going to be the last one. But then someone else showed up with another bag and said,
Come on,
guys,
bag.
let's follow one more
Yeah,
kava bag.
and
So
then
that's what
the
we're
rest
going
of
to do.
the rest of the guys who were planning to leave, they're like, you know what, this guy just came, give another camera. They'll get kata ibe. So everyone is still kata ibe.
You know, for all the listeners and the viewers, no one is gonna be allowed to go use the restroom and say I'll be right back, or guys, I just gotta take this phone call. Just tell us the truth. You're gonna leave, you're gonna go home. You don't have to lie to us and tell us that you'll be right back. But yeah, let's do that, Masi, and let's I wanted to start this segment by really having a conversation about the impact of Polynesians on sports, and let's just stay in the Pacific region in Australia and New Zealand, but specifically New Zealand. Um, and that's where I really want to kind of have this conversation kind of head towards. And this is tied to what Sam is saying here, right? Sam
Oh,
Tamakawa
watch
says
that game.
Moana gave
Yes,
it to the Blues,
I
right?
watched that
And
game. Yeah.
actually, yeah. And this is kind of a driver behind that. But I want to go back and people who know me, I'm not a big fan of New Zealand rugby, and I used to be during Jonah Lomu's time. I was a big Jonah Lomu fan. I was an All Black fan. I still remember being frustrated when George Gregan first showed up, and I was an All Blacks fan. And in the Bledisloe Cup, I think it was Jeff Wilson. They were behind by, if they scored a try, they would have won, and
Mm.
Jeff Wilson or someone was trying to score in the corner. George Gregan tackled them, and either there was a knock on or stayed under the ball, and the All Blacks lost. I remember being so frustrated because I was such a huge All Blacks fan, and then with Jonah Lomu. But then as I got older, I started to notice certain things. I started to notice that New Zealand Rugby Union was promoting rules that really didn't help the Pacific nations, right? Then I started to notice, like, the year before every World Cup, the All Blacks would pull up a bunch of Polynesians, play them against the junked international teams, and then drop them just before the World Cup.
Mm.
Because I would get so excited, like, oh man, Pita Pulotu, or all these new Tongan
Mm.
guys, especially the Tongan guys. oh man, they might make it to the World Cup, and then they'd be dropped just before the World Cup, and then never hear from them again. Then after you see that for a couple World Cups, you're like, hey, there's some kind
What's
of
going on?
fishy stuff going on here, right? And so that slowly has kind of turned me not to be excited about New Zealand Rugby Union, but I finally feel or see that New Zealand Rugby Union is getting a taste of their own medicine lately, with a lot of players leaving younger to go to Asia, to go to Europe, these
Mm,
Polynesian players who in the past would have sacrificed financial opportunity to wear the black jersey. Now they're like, nope, I'm gonna go and take care of my family. I'm gonna forego the All Blacks jersey. Um, but what are your thoughts on that, Mussy, before we go in and start talking about some of those things?
with the NZRU New Zealand Rugby, I agree with you, Dua. But I see. I've now that I've kind of been here, I don't think it's a New Zealand rugby thing. It's a world rugby issue. That's to me. That's the thing. I think New Zealand is just playing. I feel like they know they can't change it. Any rules to make it fair, Dua. That's
Mm,
just me. So they're just saying, you know what? This is the rules. We have the field of the golden mines with the Polynesian players. We're just gonna we're just gonna use it. You could argue like with those, especially the Polynesians, they would have been better in the World Cups, but because they had so much, let's just say they had the first pickings, they could have just used them up just to make the competition less because their goal is to win
yeah,
the World Cup.
yeah.
And in to my belief, Dua, if Australia was in New Zealand's position, they would have done it. If South Africa was in New Zealand's position, they would have done it. The England, same thing. It's just because of the different regions where they're at the moment. But like what you're saying, now the talent is starting to get spread across. So now New Zealand is really, they're in a struggle. They're in a weird predicament at the moment because now they're thinking they have to probably start thinking about letting overseas people who play in other clubs to change the rules on that. That's going to help the Polynesian Islands nations rugby teams. So to me, that's just my position on that. Dua, to me, this is a more bigger issue in the world governing body of rugby. That's to
Okay,
me. That's
okay.
where I see that. To me, that's where I see the issue. And those are the real players. If those guys were willing to change, I don't believe if New Zealand was the only one making that change or saying that change, they're gonna change. It's gonna take a good amount of influenced to influence the world rugby to change its governing
Mm.
policies. That's just me. Now that I've kind of been here and seen it, and I've kind of just done my own thing, I was like, I think New Zealand is just using what they game, and they're just doing real good at it because one, they're the first place where Polynesian families migrate to, so they get the first pickings. But like what you said, Dua,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay. I mean, I could possibly concede that, but the one area I'm still gonna hold New Zealand Rugby Union to be accountable for. World Rugby didn't force them to pick up these Polynesian players the
that's the
year
thing.
before
Yeah,
the World Cup and drop them off.
that's true. That's
It
true.
sounded like to me that's the same tactic that these powerhouse football programs would do before they had the 60 plus scholarship limit. Is
Hmm.
Alabama and those guys would just recruit kids, those certain kids that they weren't even intending to play, but they
Yeah.
were just going to have them sit on their bench because their mentality was it's better that they sit on our bench than play against us from another team. And I
No, and
feel that's what New Zealand did for decades.
like, yes, and I can see that point, especially with they created this new team, the Moana Pacifica team, because it's good to say they're being perceived, they're helping the Polynesian nations. But guess what? If New Zealand NZRU wants a player to play for the All Blacks, they're eligible because there's no rule that they say they can't pick a player from Moana Pacifica to come play for the All Blacks. So they can still do that. So that's what I'm saying. And then is a person gonna say no to play for New Zealand? I highly doubt it. So it's kind of like those weird things too that
Mm,
NZRU likes to be perceived. They're helping the Polynesian islands nations, but in reality, they get the first pickings, and they can if they pick, if like what you said, if they can pick somebody to play a test match, that person is not gonna say no, and then they don't pick them for the World Cup year. It's the same kind of tactic, right? So that's what I can see can still happen with Moana Pacifica team. So
yeah.
that's where I'm
Well,
seeing
see,
that happening.
and that's actually a perfect segue because that to me, that to me is fake news, and I'll
Hmm.
share with you why. So this video we're gonna watch, and I guess I'll save my comments to get to the video. Um,
Okay.
but New Zealand is trying to present themselves like we're the ones promoting Pacifica rugby, right? And I'm like, hold on. That's like Joe Biden taking credit for Donald Trump's economy, in my opinion. Okay,
Mm.
you didn't, and I'll let this play because here's the video right here, and I guess I'll use the the what you call the title of the video. I'll give my response to,
Okay.
and it says the miracle of Moana Pacifica. Right?
Hmm.
Can you see that title right here at
Yep.
the top?
Yep.
And New Zealand right now is trying to position it like, wow, look at what New Zealand rugby is doing for Pacifica rugby, right?
Mm.
How did we end up in this situation with these Pacifica teams joining Super Rugby?
They're joining
What
because
happened?
in they're in desperate times because Super Rugby is like really a dying kind of competition. So they had to do something new.
Yes. Who left Super Rugby?
So the South African teams.
Yes. The South African teams were the ones keeping Super Rugby afloat. The Australian teams, too, the Australians bring a lot more financial strength than the New Zealand teams, and the Australians, too. But it was the South Africans who were carrying Super Rugby for the longest time because their teams, their clubs were much more financially strong and they
Mm.
were selling more tickets in South Africa,
Probably
right?
getting better, probably get bigger sponsorship deals because of the viewership from their country too.
Exactly. Exactly. So, do you know how long they've been talking about Super Rugby should have a Pacifica team? Since I was in Tonga, they've been talking about that.
Oh
But
wow,
why did that never happen?
there was no
Because
need
New
to.
Zealand, there's no need to. So I
Mm.
kind of get annoyed when I hear, look at what New Zealand rugby is doing for Pacifica and the miracle of the Moana Pacifica, and it's because Super lies. The only reason why you did it is because you had no option but to do it.
Correct, correct.
Because South Africa left and no one, there wasn't enough talent, there wasn't enough money, and it was out of desperation. They were basically forced to. Super Rugby had a gun to their head, and they were forced to make a decision. And then now they're acting like, look at how smart we are. Look at how outreach hand we are. I was like, no, no, no. Let's just say it's working out great, but don't make it sound like you did some amazing because if you're saying it was that amazing up front, you would have done it decades ago.
Mm.
Maybe I'm a
Mm.
little unfair to New Zealand Rugby Union, but that's
No, it
that's
sounds
how I
fair.
feel about that.
It sounds fair. And also when they were like, I think when you said though they were talking about it, didn't they start like the Islander team with the comp? Actually did run some tests and it was getting popular, right?
And then they shut it down.
Yeah.
Right? You remember when it had Shionelawaki and the Fijian?
Yes, Lawaki.
They
Yeah.
were they were challenging everyone they were playing, the Maori All Blacks, the All Blacks and stuff. And then what happened the very next year? Shut it down
Yeah. Yeah.
for whatever reason, right? Here's an interesting question from Lupi Tupo on Facebook. She says, good dialogue. How can we improve the standard of sports in Pacific region, especially Tonga? What's your thoughts on that, Masi?
Ooh, ooh. Um, Probably for Pacific region in Tonga. To me, I think a big part of it will be government probably staying out of the governing sports, especially in
With
Tonga.
the
Uh,
corruption? Yeah.
yeah, well, you just it's like there's a lot of political interest. They're using it they're using it as an interest to drive their interest within their politics in the country, but that's not good because the sport should be sport in general. The better product always happens when they're out of politics and they're just doing it on their own. It's almost like a sport is where people just come and just have a good time. And the thing is, you've got to put people in that know the sport and are willing to drive it in a consistent way. I think the problem with some of the Pacific region, like what Lupi Tupo is sharing, there hasn't been a long consistency without any government involvement. I think there's every time there's a government involvement with, especially the governing structure of the Polynesian teams, there tends to be there's always like a high and always up and down a lot, and there's not a consistency. But I think there needs to be a separate board without government influence and interest in it and let that run on its own to develop the sport and running the sport in a full like to optimize it to its full potential. That's just me, Tua, but I don't know if
Mm,
you have any further
yeah.
details that maybe you think they can help, especially with the poly because I Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji has lately kind of been pushing because I think it's helping. They've 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 done really well to advocate to have their own Polynesian team with the Fijian Drua. I don't think All Blacks can the All Blacks pick anyone from their team, or is that specifically just for Fiji? See, I don't know the rules regarding
I
that,
don't know the rules for that either.
but
The
but
fact
I'm
that
just
they're
saying
based outside of New Zealand tells me that the current rules probably say they can't.
they can't. So
I
you
don't
know
know.
but yeah, that's just me with especially with the Tonga and Samoa teams with some of their domestic or some of the issues they're kind of facing with governing. What
Mm.
do you think? What do you think, Dua?
I don't know because this is a very difficult thing, right? Like, there's so much that needs to happen that I might have to default to your position, Mussy, because the first step, and I was just watching a interview with Bill Belichick, right?
Mm,
And he said the first step to winning the football game is to make sure you don't lose it
mm,
yourself. And what does that mean? That just means eliminate your own errors first. Before you can make this amazing offensive play, just make sure you don't have a turnover, right? Don't throw interceptions, don't fumble the ball, don't have um, false starts or pre-snap penalties. Just
mm,
don't trip over your own feet. That's the first one. And I feel that like Tonga, Samoa, and even Fiji, one of the biggest challenges we have, like you're saying, it's the government. The government gets in the way and we trip over our own feet, right? The
mm.
corruption comes, we can't even get over our own feet. So it's really hard to kind of think like how we can accelerate when maybe what we need to focus on is before we focus about accelerating, how are we tripping over our own feet? And maybe it's along what you're saying is government needs to get out of the way. But the reality is the government is the one who decides all those things. So really, you can't get government out of the way.
Well, see, here's the example tool where things can really take off and do well. We don't need government because I think government has done. It's they started, but they need to get out. That's the issue. But people like that authority to a point because it gives them that influence. But for example, the Matema Tonga, it's willing to run on its own if we're able to get structurally get that better. Because right now the problem is the right? There's the international, because I think it's still under um what, international rugby. Like it's not even run by Tonga at the moment, Tua, because there's like in a
Yeah,
court case. So
yeah, because of
I,
that Tonga National Rugby League is still, I guess, the official representative for International Rugby Federation.
yes. So what I'm trying to say is Mate Matonga has the brand name. It's selling out stadiums. Right now, you just need the right people to be in. Once this whole court case can get settled and stuff, and that's what I'm trying to say. That government can remove itself, because right now, like you said, the government is there because they do put some funds to help. Let's just say the Ikaretahi kind of said, but like I said, Ekaretai can get to the same level as Mate Matonga once. But the thing is, you're gonna need the right people to run it, and also you're gonna be able to probably improve some of the rules regarding the World Rugby with players transferring between nations and that. So that's gonna be helpful because like to me, Mate Matonga is gonna be an organization that'll be able to run on its own without
Yeah,
government without government appointing a chairman or having some kind of interest in it. So that's just kind of what I mentioned there.
yeah.
Do I?
I guess if I were to make a decision, if I had to make a decision on this, I would probably do a couple things, and I would probably look to see if we could get in a private equity investment firm
Mm,
to invest into the national teams, right? And really focus on building up that brand, like the Mate Maatonga, right? Even the Ikaletahi. But how that would impact the local sports in the Pacific, it would be number one to grow those brands. Those brands have to grow, right? You have to get Mate Maatonga to grow. You have to get the Ikaretahi to grow, and people to get excited about participating in that. I guess the next thing I would really, really say would be really important is, as weird as this sounds, there should be an effort to get Tongans overseas to invest in Tonga, right? We kind of mentioned this and we've talked about this on the podcast. There's too many of this. Oh, we need to, oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't even consider it. That private investment firm should maybe be some Tongans overseas
mm,
who have money, right?
mm,
Like some of the NFL guys or whatever, to invest into those brands. Maybe that's an option to really just give it the financial strength and independence to get out of the government's way, but still have access to World Rugby's funds to help develop it,
mm,
and try to maximize that. And then the other thing too is just try and get more Tongans overseas to invest in Tonga, because you need infrastructure in Tonga, you need economic opportunity in
mm,
Tonga. The reason why I think Fiji is doing really well and has excelled above Samoa and Tonga, they have way more economic activity. They're a
mm,
larger economy, they have more land. So Tonga needs to figure out how to create and generate more economic activity domestically. That will eventually lead to more sports, whether it's more infrastructure, better competitions. But I really think you have to get more Tongans overseas to invest in Tonga. But some of these Tongans overseas are complaining, we want to invest in Tonga, but the Tongan government is making it so painful and difficult that they can't.
agree. Yes, that because that was some of the feedback that the government is receiving. Right, is the government services is making it so difficult for people from overseas to get that access to get their money going into the country. So yeah, I see that point.
Oh, here's a hey Josh, ooh, coming out with like the blades. Josh Lee says, so Tonga not getting colonized has no benefit. What are your thoughts on that, Masi?
So Tonga not getting colonized has no benefit. No, Tonga Tonga not getting colonized is a huge benefit. I'm just saying these are the stuff that we like to talk of this stuff because if we had to choose any other way, I like the way that's happened, how Tonga played out. That's what I'm trying to
Exactly.
say, Josh. Like it's sport thing is a nice and fun thing, but when you talk about when you talk about a significant thing that probably no indigenous people has ever achieved, I'll take that. Sports is a different category of importance, and I think most Tongans would say the same thing in that category. So to me, this is it's the same thing when you talk about immigration. Tua, we always say the immigration getting access to other countries is going to be a longer process for our Tonga, but we'll take that longer process because we love the freedom and the lands that we have at the moment because of the not being colonized. So that's it's kind of like what we kind of mentioned before. We can't have everything. The world is not perfect, but we like how it played out during this time, and we're very fortunate to our ancestors that have done that. But hey, it's what the cards were dealt with, and we just have to figure this other avenue, especially with our sports, like we mentioned, Tua, with increasing the capital to build better infrastructure to have a better outcome with our national sport team. So that's just me. I don't know, Tua, if you had anything for Josh E's comment.
Yeah, my response is performing in sports is a branch on the tree, and that is something I'm willing to sacrifice to keep the root, i.e., freedom, governance, our way of living, our language, our culture.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice winning the World Cup for that.
Yeah,
As much as I would
100%.
love to win the World Cup, as much as I would love to win a World Cup, I would rather keep independence as a priority.
Well, Tua, and here's the thing, right? Not being not being colonized. What was the benefit? Why did it take a Mate Maatonga team to fill out stadiums in New Zealand? Why is that? Most people, no matter how many generations somebody's been removed from Tonga, they still find it close. Because you can remember, Germany took over Samoa, and then the British through New Zealand took over Samoa. There's a lot more Samoas in here in New Zealand, but they weren't able to sell out to Samoa games like the Mate Maatonga. And not only that, many of their players were not picking to go play for Toa
Yeah,
Samoa. It
it
was like
took the
towards the end.
Tonga to start that
What what
revolution.
why was the Mate Matonga able to do that? Culturally, you can say it's stronger because it was not tainted. Two, the language is a lot deeper. Three, the family connections through cultural practice that many overseas Tongans still practice, and people still get a sense of identity being Tongan through that, even though a lot of them have not been in Tonga. So they feel more obligation to support Tonga, and they feel more Tongan than many of our other Polynesian, because we can say Tonga is by far the smallest. A lot of the other Polynesian islands are bigger because they
They
had
should have
remember
done it first.
they had mass. Fiji has mass migrations from India. Their population is much bigger as an overall. Samoa, migration of Chinese, Germans, British till now, their population has gotten bigger. So Tonga's because like I said, Tonga were never colonized. It's always been our natural population. We're the smallest, but we're filling up Mount Mount Smart Stadium multiple times, even the Australia with this past games. So that's the benefit of not being colonized. We're much a united people as a whole, as the root, and that's the benefit, Josh E.
No, 100%. And I think I wanna pull on that string there about the Mate Tonga Masi and this
Mm,
whole thing. This is a big belief of, I believe, of this platform that we're expressing in this message to all Polynesians. The fact that Tonga survived colonization is a win for all
correct.
Polynesians across the board, because we are one culture. We were one government. We were one country, and we are one people. And because the root survived, the branches can then be benefited when that
Mm,
root. Let's just use the Matematonga for an example, right? What happened right after Matematonga? did it first.
To
Samoa
Samoa.
followed through.
Yes. Yeah.
Fiji players started to choose Fiji more. And so that to me is a prime example. It's a microcosm
Mm,
of what the bigger picture of what our people as Polynesians need to see and believe. And many can say, "Oh, you're just prideful because you're Tongan." We're Tongan, Samoan, and Fijian. I've done the DNA. It's
correct.
true, and our oral history is true. And so that is something that I think is really important. And in all honesty, um, this is like Masi, you were saying, the fact that other nations were colonized, they had access to resources much sooner than we did, right?
Hmm.
Because they were able to go to overseas decades before Tongans did, establish populations in these foreign countries, in the US and New Zealand,
Hmm.
right? Because of American Samoa and
Correct.
Western Samoa being under New Zealand. In all honesty, that is further proof that it was worth chipping off and surviving, keeping colonization. Because I don't know how to say this and not to come across the wrong way, but a lot of our brothers and sisters had access to quote unquote economic resources and opportunities overseas, but we're almost at the same stage. Samoa is slightly ahead, because especially here in the U.S., because they infiltrated the U.S. a lot sooner than Tongans did. Because we were an independent nation, it was a lot harder to come to the U.S. Same thing in New Zealand, but I don't see a overly advantageous position looking around now.
Mm.
So it was worth the pain and the sacrifice of keeping independence, because we're now in many ways, like especially through the Mate Maatonga, paving the way for our brothers and sisters to say, yeah, this is the path that we can help our parents and our ancestors by giving up the economic opportunity
Yeah.
now by following the example that the Mate Maatonga did.
Yeah. And it's almost like that's like many of the Tongans they did. This light is only a temporary light before we can pass on the economic opportunities. It's what we have right now is only a temporary stay, and we'll take the side that it's um less fortunate with resources, but much more satisfying to the soul and spirit. That's what I would say.
100%. And I'm going to skip the first video that I was going to show at first, because we've already kind of covered the whole point of that video, which
Okay.
was which was Moana Pacifica is doing great now, and New Zealand is trying to take this whole credit. Like, wow, look at us. We had such a great idea. When in reality, you had no other option. You can't come and say, I chose this. It's such a great choice, when you had no other option but to do that. So you don't
So
get
you
the credit.
it's not a new idea. They just dust off some old ideas and then just say, okay, we have no choice. Let's insert this idea now. Let's go full on. We're not
That's
losing
how I
much.
see it. That's how I see it, right? When you're like so desperate, you're sinking, you're gonna do whatever you can grab on. It's like when you're hungry. When you're so hungry, all of a sudden the one thing you didn't like to eat, but now you're so hungry, all of a sudden you're just gonna eat that because there's no other option.
There's no
That's
other
how
option.
I feel it was. But am
Mm,
I glad that the option happened? Yes,
mm.
I'm glad. But at the same time, it has its challenges. So let's kind of get into this video, because, and actually some of this conversation is very relevant, because I also believe, Artie Savea has been the superstar lately, right? He's done some
Oh,
fantastic things.
yeah.
Um, but I will say, I don't know if he would have done what he did if Mate Maatonga and that whole thing and the success of the Mate Maatonga didn't happen,
Mm.
right? Because everyone said, Artie, don't do it. You'll lose money. You'll lose your chance to play for the All Blacks. It's going to hurt your career. It's just a bad idea. And he did it anyway, which is very similar to what the Mate Maatonga did. But let's watch this video and get some reactions to it.
The idea of if you can't get to this weight, it's hard to see you in a team like
Excelling.
the All Blacks.
Yeah.
we're talking about 3, 4, 5 kgs here.
I told my wife I'm done, and I was just like 95% gone to France.
The out of it thing about Ardie Savea is he's one of the best and most loved rugby players in the world, but he's strangely very controversial. Many fans believe Ardie should be captain over Scott Barrett. Critics have said Ardie playing for Moana Pacifica is terrible for his All Black career.
But is it good for Ardie Savea if they have another season where they're second to last? Is that going to help us as All Black fans?
He negotiated his own NZR contract, is signed with Jay-Z's Rock Nation Sports. And most controversially, Steve Hansen didn't want to pick him in the All Blacks. This was despite several dominant seasons in Super Rugby. Hansen thought Ardie wasn't ready for the bigger bodies and collisions in test match rugby. Sam Cane was his man.
Hi, I'm Joe Delaney. Today we're going to talk about
what are your thoughts on that so far, Masi? That's some interesting.
No, I'm glad that Ardie Savea looks like it said that he negotiated. He's almost like pulling a Mayweather kind of thing, doing his own thing. There's a few NFL players that kind of do the same thing. I think Lamar Jackson, he does his own negotiation with his contract regarding the NFL. So I think that's a good thing. There gives you a sense of autonomy, and you decide really what you want. Dua. But I'm glad that he's doing that. It's a good step because I think this is the next step for Polynesians as a whole, that we can do things. This is the next thing. Like, we can't just be always just ready to play a game. This is the next step of when you can negotiate progression. Next step, you can negotiate your own contracts, and hopefully, the further step is we can see more Polynesians actually owning and running some of these Super Rugby teams, or even being part of these franchises, that maybe we can get more influence to maybe change the game for the better. Because I'm a big fan of just I don't know why there's rules on not transferring players to play. Like, to me, fans are gonna. It creates more excitement. At the same time, you get all the best players playing in the competition. I think rules like 2 year stand down or whatever is a bit silly. To me, if a person has any family members from that country or heritage, they should be able to play and let them play. That's just me, Tua. Some of the quick reactions here from Ardie Savea.
To me, it feels like the Ardie Savea situation is like a microcosm of what New Zealand did to the Pacific Island teams for forever and ever, right? We know the Pacific Island talent is the most exciting talent many times in rugby in the world, but for many times, they don't fit the mold for whatever reason. They're good for props and forwards, but they're not. We can't take them serious as fly halves and skilled positions, and it took for a long time for that to change. And also, I didn't realize that he signed with Jay-Z, a foreign group, which may be kind of what we talked about. Maybe that's what needs to happen in Tonga, Fiji, and Samoa to expedite the progress made there, right? Because if he signed with Jay-Z and them, and they're like, hey, no, you don't have to sacrifice and follow their rules. If we think you can go here and you can be successful there and establish yourself, that's the route to take. And it's much more of an independent route rather than saying, I'm going to get stuck in this system.
Yeah, good
so
point.
Interesting. I didn't know that about him and the American organization. Yeah.
Oh, looks like I'm not hearing it, Tua.
Oh.
The contact better, like
there we go.
Yeah, let me go back
just a
little
Blacks
bit. Right there.
Fans demanded Ardie play 7 over Sam Cane. Why is he controversial? Ardie marches to his own beat, bulk up to handle the contact better like Sam Cane. Nope, he's his own player. The outrageous hairdos, prioritizing speed, fitness, and being an influencer, for lack of a better term, with his powerful brand off the field. Why is Ardie's weight controversial? For an 80-minute number 8, Artie is undersized for test match rugby. Most number 8s play at a minimum of 110 kilograms, while Artie barely makes 100 kilograms. Fans have been screaming from the rooftops for a bruising 8, like Kieran Reid, who stops huge runners on the spot. Or even someone like Shannon Frizzell, the most recent All Blacks enforcer. This would push Artie to where most fans want him, open side, and a tall, fast bruiser like Frizzell at 8.
To the 22, and the ball. There is Frizzell! Frizzell! Oh my goodness!
But before we deep dive, let's have a look at where it all started. Artie and his older brother Julian grew up in suburban Wellington, surrounded by loving family and friends. The brothers thrived, looking at their schoolboy tapes. The future rugby superstars had it all: fitness, excellent understanding of space and time, and brought it all together on the field. Remember to get your new All Blacks jersey. Just scan the QR code on screen or click.
You know what this makes me think of, Masi?
What's up?
Artie Savea fits much better and is the next wave of progression in professional sports that New Zealand is not ready for. Artie Savea is much more in the US model, where it's about the player and the player's brand and the player's following. See, New Zealand rugby, like in that video, said, oh, he has a brand, his big brand off his social media, influencing stuff and all this stuff outside of the game, not fitting into the mold of what they think a number 8 should be or whatever. That's like, to an American fan, consumer or sports consumer, that's like, dude, LeBron James is the team.
Yeah.
Tom Brady
Yeah.
is the team. Like, the team is built of players, and it's the character, it's the influence of the players themselves that makes the team valuable. The team is valuable because of the player, but New Zealand is still running off of the old school model of we have to crush everything else. There can only be the team brand and the team thing. It's a very old school way of looking at professional sports.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. Like, even if you take Jonah Lomu, should not never be a winger. If you go by size and
Yes.
weight, that's what I'm trying to say. And remember that Jonah Lomu, just being with his humble side, he kind of let New Zealand All Blacks dictate whatever he needed to be. It was only a pure luck of chance that a coach just put him there at number 7. I mean number 11, and then he just kind of took off with it, because in reality he should never be a number 11. He doesn't fit the mold, like what they were saying. Some of these coaches don't want Artie Savea and being on the edge of not picking him because he didn't fit the mold of a number 8, a big running bruiser. So I was like, there's a lot of things that what you said to it, like, and that's probably a big hindrance on rugby not growing as quickly, because if you think about it, rugby is still very light years behind of the other sports regarding salary and stuff, because the game hasn't evolved quick enough, because it's still in this medieval times mentality, and it's the game is suffering compared to the other sports. And you're starting to see it, like, I think there's some other players that are trying to do these NFL international tour, and even Mailata even said that the pay that these guys in rugby. I saw an interview. He said he said he doesn't know why they still get paid that way. You know,
Yeah.
and he's only been in the NFL only a couple of years, and his mind is being opened on. The game it's much more than just a team. It's the player, and focusing on new ideas on how to ch- change each position. Position is not defined on what size you need to be to fit that mold. People
Yeah.
can redefine the position. I mean, dude, look at centers. Centers are not supposed to be shooting threes anymore or shooting jump shots. Before it was
Yeah.
all dunk, and now it's jump shots, and now it's out 3 phases. You can dunk, jump shot, and even shoot some
Shoot the
deep
threes.
threes. That's what I'm trying to say. There's like no things to change, and rugby is is suffering its own problem, not willing to adapt. And maybe if, that's why that's why players only get paid, just $1 million. That's really low in today's professional sports standards of high end players. So that's just me, Dua.
No, and especially in rugby union. I mean, dude, in rugby union New Zealand, I don't even know how many players actually make $1 million
Mm.
in New Zealand. I mean, in rugby league, the superstars make $1 million, but I
Well,
don't know how many. I don't know how
league,
many rugby union guys actually make $1 million a year.
yeah, well, league, right? League is definitely moving out at a faster pace. That's for sure than
Mm,
union. Yeah.
10-4. Let's come back here real quick.
Click the link in the description.
Hey, let's get back to the report.
As Julian's career took off into the stratosphere, making the All Blacks in 2012, Ardie was rocketed into the New Zealand Sevens team as a teenager.
Very quick, the young 18-year-old.
Do you want to know where to invest it?
Oh, great. Let's any thoughts there, Masi, while we wait for this commercial to go through?
Nope, nope. To me, I just can't wait for the day that rugby union can start making things much more interesting, like league. Right now, league. I think the discussion in league that's happening is the state of origin. Right, they've kind of gone past the international stage, and they're good with the transferring of players. But now it's gone to the state of origin, and they're kind of having that debate. But I just can't wait for the day that union just allows, what, let the players decide where they want to play, and none of this stand down thing, because to me that will make union exciting again. That's just me, Dua.
I got a quick question, Masi. Why is union struggling so much in New Zealand that is a quote unquote rugby nation?
Well, when I was watching that Moana Pacifica game against Blues, it's been a while since on TV I saw a good amount of
The
crowd.
stands, yeah.
Yeah,
And the
man.
excitement of and the excitement of the fans during the game, because I watched the highlights. I mean, the
Yeah,
fans were up there like pulling off their shirts, the flags.
yeah,
Usually, when I see a rugby union game, they're just sitting, everybody's watching, nobody gets super excited. But you go to an NRL, it gets more exciting on an NRL game.
yeah.
This may just come back to what we're talking about. Why are people super excited about Moana Pacifica? Because the players have character and personality, and it's the players that are driving the interest. Like Ardie Savea and what he's doing is what's getting that interest. And then to watch the players play an exciting brand of rugby, and to me, it's just like, and how often has rugby union changed their rules to be more entertaining to the fans? I feel like rugby union does this. The fans need to appreciate rugby union rather than rugby union saying, how can we better position ourselves for the fans? That's what rugby league does really well. Rugby league is much more thoughtful of what can we do to make the game more exciting and involve the players in the rules. Granted, outside of the game, they don't do as good as America in engaging fans, but I mean, just in regards to the product itself,
Product.
rugby league is much more willing to improve their product and make changes to make the product better. While I see New Zealand Rugby Union and Super Rugby, they're like, no, you need to appreciate the game for the game. It's like, no, man, like you got to realize that you're competing with the whole world now for entertainment,
Correct.
right? The young kids right now are not like Ardie Savea, where they're all about listening to the rugby and everything. Now these kids have YouTube influencers, they have
Netflix.
streamers, they have
Yeah.
all this stuff that you got to compete with. And I feel like rugby union, and especially New Zealand Rugby Union, is not trying to develop ways to make their product better. That's why I almost like laugh when they say, oh, we're gonna take over the American market. Can you please just win the New Zealand market first? If you cannot win the rugby country market, what makes you think you're going to win the market in America that has football, that has baseball, that has basketball, and all these other
Hockey.
sports
Yeah.
to compete with?
Well, yeah, and I was just thinking too. It'll be interesting because I have a good you know view of how what the attendance looks like in New Zealand for their Super Rugby. It'll be interesting to see. I think Australia is probably struggling too with the Super Rugby attendance because they haven't been so good. I've seen some of the Brumbies at home attendance not so good, and they tend to be the top team from Australia and the other
Mm-hmm.
Australian teams. It'll be interesting to find out how are the attendance for the local for the domestic competition like in Europe and the top 14 in France and South Africa. If are they having better attendance with their games? I don't know. It could be a
The
global thing, or is it just a New Zealand Australia thing with the rugby union, Super Rugby?
I don't know the answer, but my gut feeling is this, Masi. In Europe, it's it's not as it's not as filled in the stadiums as it is in South Africa. South Africa seems to have the strongest attendance in from when I watch
Rugby.
the
Yeah.
highlights of the games. The thing with Europe is there's a lot more money and they have a billionaire who like subsidizes it, right?
Mm,
It seems like the European model is for like in France and stuff. Um, and the clubs and stuff are a little bit more self-sufficient. New Zealand, it almost feels like it's subsidized by the government. That's what I feel like this, like a lot of these clubs and stuff, it feels like they're subsidized because I don't see how they're making money. I don't know.
well, a lot of NZRU is heavily subsidized by the government, so it's really hard to gauge how they're doing when they're relying on government kickbacks.
Well,
You
when
know?
taxpayer dollars is what's really funding you.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, and that may be the see, and that's the problem. That's the problem when you get taxpayer dollars because you don't have to compete. You aren't forced to be creative because, oh, we're just going to get subsidized,
Mm,
right?
mm.
But when you're saying, hey, dude, you either figure this out or you're going to go out of business or shut down, all of a sudden you're more willing to be creative. Just like the Moana Pacifica, right? When you have no other option, all of a sudden you're willing to try something new. But when you had South Africa in Super Rugby, you weren't willing to try something new.
Yeah. Just keep the status quo.
Keep the status quo.
Mm.
Interesting.
Well, it's the same thing. You can take isn't it the same problem when you have universal health care? People, there's the innovation with new medical practice and
It
innovation in
stops.
medical, it stops because you get subsidized by the government. It's for everybody. But when it's like a little bit privatized. There's a reason why all the new technology with medical equipment and new medicines come from the U.S. because they're willing to try new things to keep pushing the innovation further. So I
Yeah,
mean,
because
maybe
the
maybe
market rewards them. The
with
market
market
rewards them when they come up with something that works.
new, correct. Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Oh, it's silent. Tua.
Oh, geez. This is the problem of having only one screen.
One screen.
I can't see when it's.
She's off. The objective.
There
If
we go.
Kiwi fans didn't know who he was before his Sevens inauguration, they definitely did by the end of the Sevens season. Instantly, the prodigy made his debut for his beloved Hurricanes. The hometown kid gave everyone a glimpse of what was to come. Incredible power and technique in the tackle. Artie was dominant in the Bunnings NPC, or Mitre 10 NPC, or ITM NPC, or Placemakers NPC, or Timber Merchant NPC, or whatever they called it back in 2013. Then came the All Blacks, kind of call up on the end of year tour, a non-playing apprentice. If you were like me, you thought Artie would debut for the All Blacks in 2014 or 2015. No, Steve Hansen chose proven battlers Liam Messam, Sam Cane, Victor Vito, and Jerome Kaino. Artie must have been third or fourth in line at 7 with McCaw, Sam Cane, and Matt Todd ahead of him.
These are the classic crew trigs by Mott and Bow, by far.
Interesting.
I just kind of blown away. Like I said, it doesn't seem like there's a vision for the future of trying to do something different, trying to be open to new ideas. It's just kind of like status quo. We're always going to have the Polynesian talent. We don't have to compete. We don't have to try and improve our product. We're just going to do the same thing over and over. I don't know. That's crazy.
It's crazy. So he had the opportunity to be picked in 2014, but just because he didn't fit the mold of the size, huh? And
yeah,
interesting.
The mold, the size, apparently the way he plays is unorthodox, right? Like, especially when you watch what he's doing now, the guy is kicking for touch. The guy's chip and chase. He's doing all kinds of stuff. But it's like, oh, no, you just have to fit in the mold. And I'm like...
Run, bruiser, tackling bruiser kind of person,
Yeah. But the thing is, he was providing that. Even though he was, quote unquote, undersized, he was providing that. But, I mean, granted, I don't like that it was done this way, but it's actually working good overall because this is probably things that motivated him to go to Moana Pacifica and made him think differently.
Yeah, well, and here's the powerful thing that he did going to Moana Pacifica. Now, when I think of Moana Pacifica, I think of Artie Savia's face, like he's the face of it, and maybe that there's another positive outcome for people who think like he's just gonna be a lot more prominent in people's minds,
No, 100%. And look at the impact it's having on attendance and support and fans showing up. And I was like watching the last Blues game, and I was like, dude, is this an NRL game?
Yeah.
Like, why are the fans so into it? Like, I've never seen Super Rugby in New Zealand. That even in Australia, it's not that type of emotion and excitement. And this is one more example of why New Zealand needs to adopt the model of your players are your product. That is what you're selling. You need to sell your players because that's what's going to bring in the fans to the sport. And I was watching this other podcast that was making some observations, Masi.
Yeah.
When they beat, who did they beat? Was it Wellington? Who was it? Who was it that they beat like last week or the week before? I can't remember who it was, or maybe it was the Crusade. I can't remember who it was.
Let me see here. The Moana Pacifica team tour. So they played.
Yeah.
They played the Blues this week. Last week was the Highlanders. They beat, and
It
then
was
they
the
played
Highlanders.
Okay.
It was the Highlanders. And you know what was crazy? Do you know who all the kids after the game? Guess who they all went up to?
Artie Savia.
Artie Savia. Right? See, all the things that they criticized him for, his engagement in social media, working on his branding outside of the game, right? His involvement outside of the game in other things. That's what's making him the draw and the support.
Yeah.
Right? That's why everyone's excited about him. Even when he's at the away games, he's still the superstar because there's no one else really doing that.
Uh-huh.
But that was all the negatives is why they weren't willing to make him the premier or the preferred choice for number 7. On top of being undersized and being unconventional. See, it's all working out well for him now, but it wasn't a few years ago.
Oh, put the sound on, Tua.
Oh yeah. Some people never learn.
At home in the Super Rugby final. An injured Arties watched from the sidelines after picking up an injury in the semi-final the week before. But 2016 and Ardie and the Canes went all the way in, and Ardie finally made his debut for the All Blacks. If the rugby world hadn't seen his explosiveness before, they got their first taste that night and the following week.
There, and Reed breaks away. 15 metres out. Here's Ardie Savia on the charge. Takes it.
Big line out where the backs come in, but they've got to get it right in the first instance. Coles gets it, offloads to Severe, explosive.
Then there was this long-range stunner.
Perenara.
Undersized.
Nice.
Unconventional.
Oh, and that's some try. That started with, you would have to say, probably one of the worst kicks Ryan Cotty's ever executed.
Like he did in Super Rugby, he was shrugging defenders off, carrying what seems like the whole forward pack, and gaining crazy meters after contact. But like in Super Rugby, he looked like a centre in the 7 jersey with his insane line running.
Aaron Smith again. Ardie Savia stepping, holding it up, gives it back to Aaron Smith. Ben Smith! And in goes Aaron Smith. Looks to hand it off, does to Ardie Savia. And in.
If you were like me and thought the All Blacks would carry on their winning ways post-McCaw because they have Ardie and Sam Cane, the amazing Irish had other ideas.
Picks it up quickly and off he goes. Drops it off the headshot.
Who's coming?
It's just crazy to me now that we're looking at the highlights and stuff. To just not see what he could be. Maybe we're saying that now because he's doing so great. I don't know. He's done so much since then that now we're all talking about him. I don't know if I'm just speaking of hindsight's 2020, but I'm just shocked.
Interesting. No, interesting. And there's been talk on that some of the people that I've kind of listened to on some of their commentary that the All Blacks the other countries are starting to get catching up to where the All Blacks used to be pretty dominant in international matches, but because now that pool is not as the first pickings like it used to be, do it with the first picking of Polynesians, but now you're seeing like that Bundy guy doing well in the Samoan guy doing well in
Ireland.
Japan is always there with some Polynesians, and then New Zealand still maintaining its rule, not picking, former players
who are playing in foreign competitions.
Foreign competition, it's they don't. You start to see them lose a lot more because they're not being so dominant, because it's almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot. Like, you gotta adapt to be changing some rules to be maintain excellence. But we'll see. It's I guess the other countries are fine, catching up with it.
Yeah,
but
they like it.
They like it, but New Zealand, like I'm just thinking guys like what's that kid, Richie Mo'unga? He's playing in Japan and stuff. These guys are no longer eligible, and looks like the All Blacks are still going to maintain with their rule of. It's so weird, and this is the funny thing, and this is how this is a full control thing. They say they don't allow players to play in foreign competitions, but they have these things called sabbaticals that the NZRU can allow you within their contract for you to play overseas. So that route is okay. But if you go on your own to play overseas, you can't come back.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have to have NZRU to always be involved in your negotiation. If they're not involved, they won't allow you to play overseas and not be selected for the All Blacks. But if you go and do your own thing without them, they won't pick you. Like, that's the weird thing. I don't know why many fans are not questioning that and throwing, or even the top programs for rugby commentary they think that's okay, and I don't feel like it's like, dang, me as more of a person that's actually been in different countries and in countries that run sports that make, like the NFL is the most valuable organized sports organization in the world. They allow these things. Like, none of that thing doesn't make sense, but in rugby, I guess that's fine. But I just find that really weird, that sabbatical rule. You can play overseas competitions with with them, knowing, but they can still pick you for the All Blacks. But if you do your on your own, they can't pick you. I find that really weird. But I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think, Masi, these are all symptoms or driven by the fact that they're subsidized by the government.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They don't feel the pain of their bad choices. They
Mm,
don't feel it. They don't feel it. They're like, oh, Shaipe, I can make this bad decision, but the government's gonna cover the cost anyway. So there's no incentive to try and get it right the first time. Right?
mm,
Because it comes back to you said, I'm trying to now that we're having this conversation and you confirm that a lot of their stuff is subsidized, that explains why they're so stubborn and why they're so slow to change. They're basically acting like a government. They're not willing to make the change. And I think they overestimated their quote unquote systems and processes when really they just had the resources, and this opportunity manifested itself naturally and not because of their management. They just had a good enough economy with
mm,
a high population of raw talent with Polynesians and not heavy competition from outside to pull this talent away from them. And so they thought they were so good because they were making all these great decisions, and the New Zealand way of doing rugby was just their great choices and blah blah blah. When it's kind of like, you know what? It's I'm starting to feel like, and maybe I could be wrong, I'm starting to feel like New Zealand's success with the All Blacks had less to do with this unique system that
mm,
New Zealand had, and more of it was just they were more part a result of their environment than I used to think before. I think they you could have put anyone in that environment and they would have been successful to
mm,
a high degree, right? Because if you look at it, they had a decent economy, even though it's struggling now. That's another thing that's hurting New Zealand rugby. Probably economy is struggling. The Polynesian population, a lot of them are leaving to Australia. Even before, I can't tell you how many um, NRL players. They all say, "Oh yeah, I grew up in New Zealand, but then we moved here when I was 5 or 4."
mm,
And there's a lot of that story. I mean, so they're losing not just the talent that's developed in New Zealand after they become pros, like Richie Mo'unga and Charles Putau. They're
mm.
also losing a good portion of the talent leaving as kids,
Yeah.
going to Australia because of economic opportunity. The same, see, they were benefiting from people leaving Samoa and Tonga going to New Zealand because of economic opportunity. But now those same people are looking to Australia, and they're going to Australia now,
Mm,
and they're
mm,
going to the NRL. So I'm starting to think that the New Zealand way of rugby, it wasn't necessarily they had some kind of system. They were just in a really good spot where the economy was doing good. They had the large talent pool, and they could exercise control with very little negative impact. But now that the environment has changed and they're not willing to adapt, they're exposing the weaknesses in their system.
mm. Well, and that's see, and this is the interesting thing to what, like, with this whole reset with the whole economy and the trade, New Zealand government might have to rethink its always propping for these sports, and they need to focus on other things like defense and infrastructure and all these other things, and maybe and then that's when NZRU really needs to wear the big boy pants and face the world as an independent organization, sports competing in the world.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, man.
Because didn't they have some kind of big issue with some huge sponsor that just pulled out from them,
Yeah,
like some kind of insurance company?
the Enos, that big, the Enos, the front, use the front jersey. They're an insurance company. They pulled out. I've heard that the Ford has also pulled out, and the what's that New Zealand beer, Strangler or Stylager, I think. They used to be called the Steilager mid test, but now they pulled out, and it's just called the mid test now. When France, I think they're playing against France this year, so it's even the sponsorship. NZRU has said they're financially okay, but they will always say that. But when you get like the major sponsor Enos, the New
Pulling
Zealand
out.
beer Steilager, and also the Ford have pulled out. Yeah, that's not a good sign for the future looking of the organization. So yeah, it's very interesting, Tua.
Yeah, so either I guess the two main reasons that you should be concerned is, or to explain it is, either your brand is weakening and you're not getting the eyeballs that you usually get with the
Mm,
brand, or the economy is so bad that they don't have the same funds for
yeah,
sponsorship. And it may be both. The worst case scenario is it's both of those things.
yeah, yeah. So there's some
Hmm.
real issues facing New Zealand rugby. So they don't adapt. Usually in business, right? You don't adapt or anything. You tend to
You
lose
die.
your influence, and then your last lifeline is the government funding or subsidies they're giving you. Once the government pulls that off, then you're dead in the water. You know?
Yeah. Dude, yeah, maybe, man, that would be kind of crazy to think that the one of the greatest brands in rugby could be in
Yeah.
financial collapse.
Mhm. Oh, I
Had
don't think
new
I'm hearing
tricks up their
sound.
sleeves
There we go.
in the form of great phase play and bullocking forward runners. The question was, how would the All Blacks slow down these great runners? Sam Cane in the loose is one of the best front-on tacklers in world rugby because of his power
Seen
and
like 3
his
high
speed.
hits in a
To be
row
fair,
from the All
that's
Blacks.
something Sam Cane does better than Artie because of the weight difference. As the Lions tour of 2017 approached, did the All Blacks have the firepower behind Sam Cane, Jerome Kano, and Kieran Red to stop the Lions forwards? You'd have to say they did, but poor discipline and strange officiating cost the All Blacks the series.
Like a man possessed there. So cool from Cruden. Look at
Crazy.
So Artie was his bollocking best off the bench, but he still wasn't trusted to start the biggest games in front of Sam Cane until this game.
Polisi making the tackle. Straight off.
Sam Cane went down in Pretoria with a life-threatening neck injury, and all of a sudden, Artie was the last man standing. 1 year out from the World Cup, the seven stocks looked thin, but how did Artie go?
There's just one real estate asset, ordinary.
Thanks. So
Oh,
Artie was not even selected. It took an injury for them to finally put him in. Same
That's
kind of
what I was
concept with
gonna
the
say.
Moana Pacifica team being introduced.
So once again, you can't take the credit when that was the only option. You were forced to. It's like Moana Pacifica. You can't say you did this great thing when it's just like, well, we had no option.
There's nothing else I
So
can do.
there's nothing else I can do. That is freaking hilarious, man. I didn't see this is kind of interesting. I didn't know that it was all this circumstantial stuff.
Mm.
Started a stunning performance with the All Blacks winning at the death thanks to a 78th minute Artie steal.
So Artie Savia comes in and wins the game.
All Blacks have the 10 seconds to play in Pretoria. Ioane waits out wide.
To make sure everyone knew he'd hit the top of his hero arc, Artie scored the match-winning try a minute later.
Marmion for Stander.
Artie's awesome ball playing, footwork, misdirections, and amazing core and leg strength in the tight stuff was there for all to see.
Penalty coming, All Blacks way. Savia.
Penalty
Still outside the 20.
Was there a drop-off? Now that Artie was the first choice back rower alongside Kieran Reid, Artie excelled in the loose and in the tight stuff.
Hey, who's that team? 64-0.
What was that, Mussy?
No, I was gonna say what was that team that 64-0
Was
highlight?
it the Ikaretahi?
Hey, no worries about that one. We'll go ahead and pretend that didn't happen.
That's because we didn't have the Matematonga team playing.
Yeah, lucky.
Lucky.
Matematonga team play. We would have that would have been a 70-0 zip for the All Blacks. If Matematonga was playing. Lucky, very
Lucky,
lucky.
lucky.
Yeah.
From Adi Savia through free. Adi Savia
Man, he's been doing what he's doing with the Moana Pacifica since forever.
takes his position at the back of the maul, ripped free by Adi Savia, but knocks it forward.
2019, Artie was everywhere. England, with their masterful game plan, avoided being tackled around Artie like he had COVID, even though it was 2019 and COVID came out a few months after this game.
This guy happy to rumble over the top to a Lungy, touch isolated, still. Here's Laws. Another crack at New Zealand. It's muck over the collar.
The English were amazing, precise running lines, huge bodies over the ball in a blink of an eye. The few opportunities Artie and the All Blacks got, England shut them down within a flash.
Sinclair. Scrappy at the back. Backwards is a call, and Ben Young's immediately.
Of course, you can never shut down Artie Savia. He will always influence the game.
Makes the tackle, bounces to his feet, and does it again. Artie Savia. George. Oh, it's overthrown too. Artie Savia, New Zealand are on the board. Game on. Is the switch for Sevilla, and he runs in it.
The All Blacks bounced back in 2020 with Artie running like a centre and becoming one of World Rugby's premier players.
What a brilliant try by the All Blacks! Oh, what are we witnessing here? Caleb Clark carries with that number 6 on his back, and now Adi Savia busting through. Can he sneak it away? Oh, doesn't need to. Brilliant try by Adi Savia. That's just high quality set piece from the.
Artie continued his formidable run, even in a struggling All Black team, his supreme conditioning, the number of times he's involved in the game, it's incredible. And top of that, the line breaks in the open and in the tight, amazing strength in the tackle.
Well, they're getting tense too.
Bit of improvisation there from Aaron Smith.
Tackle it away.
The heartache of the World Cup final loss was offset a bit by Artie winning World Rugby Player of the Year. Artie was amazing, even though he almost got knocked out.
And the thing is, for Adi Savia, he's upright, he's not dipping at all. That's the concern for mine for Tia Kolesi. You see, he's second man in an attack.
In 2024, a change came with new coach Scott Robertson. Artie had a different role with attacking phenom Wallace Sititi, making the 6 jersey his own. Artie found himself in the tight more, but of course, with Artie's 6 skills, no team can ever keep him from a crazy line break or two.
Clark's got it now. Savia set it back in field. He goes.
So here we are, the beginning of Super Rugby 2025. As if he didn't need more motivation to break Super Rugby, he's been told he's going to be a bust because he's playing for Moana Pacifica. As if there haven't been top All Blacks and struggling Super Rugby teams before.
Aaron Smith, step up. Sure, Solomon is going to get this.
Interesting.
So the man that marches to his own beat is Super Rugby with Moana Pacifica going to keep him at the top of his game. I believe it will. Players at that level need extra motivation after years at the top. And Artie, he looks like he's found his home with Moana. Make sure to like and...
Interesting.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Any thoughts on that, Masi? What are your thoughts watching this?
I mean, something's going on. Like I said, I've seen many Super Rugby games. Usually the crowds don't start filling up till like second round into the playoffs. You know what I mean? But like for a season game and watching the Auckland Blues and the Moana Pacifica play, it's been a while since I've been since I've seen a nice crowd like that in a season game. So something's going good, right? So I think the only difference you can only probably say is Artie Savia now is playing for the Moana Pacifica team. So, and you know, the funny thing is, I was just looking at the record. They're only like 6-6, 6 wins, 6 lost. So they're right in the middle. But seems like some of the positive attention is just going Moana Pacifica. That's people are just willing to show up to watch their games. They're a lot more exciting. So that's just kind of my observation, Tua, regarding this. I don't know. You have anything different?
Yeah, I think there's the Artie Savea is the pillar. He's the main guy, and then you just have a bunch of other guys just performing really well. It's the Pellegrini. You have the Havili guy, and
Mm,
then the
mm.
guy who plays wing, Tupo, or what's the young
Tam
kid that's
Tamor
also
Palau yeah, that he
Talmor
plays for
Furlau,
that. Yes.
right? And then you have all these other. There's just it feels like Artie Savea is like the cornerstone of the team, and he's playing fantastic rugby. But it's also these young players that and less known players that are also performing off the charts. That's just it just feels like the team is full of energy, full of excitement, and Artie is really just allowing them to accomplish things that they never would have accomplished. I think if he wasn't
Mm,
there, and
mm,
also just the attention that he brings to them. If Artie wasn't on that team, these guys could be performing really well, but no one would be paying as much attention. I don't know.
mm. Yeah, I see that. I see that. I see that too, Tua. I see that.
I think we'll have our closing thoughts here, and I'll kind of give my closing thoughts, and then you can close for us, Mussy. But I think there's a lesson to be learned in observing Artie Savea and what he does is doing, because it feels like there is a movement of change that New Zealand Rugby Union is on the short end of that stick, and they will remain on that short end of the stick, and that short end will only get shorter if they don't figure out a way to address this and to adapt. Because if they continue to do the same old thing, hopefully it doesn't happen, but I can see this possibly happen. One of the most iconic brands could be bankrupt and go from one of the most feared teams in the world to one that's just trying to stay alive on life support.
Mm,
And as much as I'm not a big All Blacks fan, but I like rugby. I prefer rugby league, but I like rugby, and I don't want to see that because the All Blacks are such an important brand to that sport that it would be really unfortunate if they get into a really tough position financially that will hurt the overall game itself. But really appreciate people like Artie Savea, who he sounds like someone who really thinks out of the box, is willing to do new things. It kind of feels like I always thought that maybe he was just doing fine and doing great, but now watching this, he's had a lot of opposition and
mm,
challenges in his career. Um, and kudos to him for being diligent, sticking hard, pushing through with it, and then not falling into the temptation of, because he was half accepted, to concede more in order to maintain what he's been accepted for, quote unquote. But he's willing to give that up to pursue his own path. And it's paying for him in colors, in spades, because he's doing so well as a personal person and his personal brand, and also the impact on the Polynesian sports. And this is going to have an impact on future Polynesian athletes on how they make decisions on their career. So
mm.
good luck to Artie, and wish him the best. And it's really exciting to see a team in Super Rugby that's getting fans super excited and super involved. But those are my closing thoughts, Mr. Ateoroa. You want to close us
Well,
out?
yeah. Well, Tua, closing thoughts. Enjoyed our discussion regarding the Mariner account being shared by Lolo on his findings and his interpretations of the Mariners account. Enjoyed us talking about the spiritual connection and just remind us that we are spiritual people, as verified in the Mariners account, and also talking about sports. Like I said, it was almost invigorating seeing. We talked yesterday, Toa. I was talking and still watching. I was like, and that's the thing that came to my mind. It's like, hey, this crowd is a bit different than the previous Super Rugby games I've been watching. Just speaking with you and watching at the same time. But I think a lot of that is people are sensing the incitement from RD Savea, staying true to who he is as a player, not being affected by other people thinking he should be like somebody else. But I hope they have a good season, and is a in a bigger change that rugby union can be better. Like I said, I tend to cheer for the New Zealand All Blacks because it tends to have the most Polynesians, Tongans in it. So I always tend to cheer for them against international teams. In most, I think only a couple times I've kind of rooted for Australia because there was more Polynesians that started on the first 15. So that's kind of the main reason why I kind of follow the All Blacks, just to see who's the up and coming and who's some of the new names that are playing for or playing in international rugby matches. So that's just my spill. Thank you everyone for joining us, viewing us, and sticking with us in this live digital kava session on the Polynesian Irish podcast. We appreciate you, and keep shooting some questions and comments. We always look at them and try our best to respond to all of them. Wish you guys all the best. And just the two questions the Polynesian Eyes podcast always leave with everyone is stay curious and ask the hard questions. Ovatu, take care.
Peace.
Peace.